which, is not a huge move, but it's also, they're moving to one of the most expensive business districts in Boston, seemingly just to appear trendy. And it's gonna screw over a bunch of their employees.
So there's like a podcast thing or something, right?
Yeah, hello everybody and welcome to Modular Components. I'm your only host, Simeon Scott. It's been a long time since I've hosted this podcast properly, but that's okay because it's also been a very long time since we've had our special guest of the evening on. It's Mr. Jacob Brody. How you doing, sir?
Greeting. It's good to be back. Been a little while.
Yeah, near a little over 3 years actually.
Hard.
I was gonna say nearly, but no, we were talking about this off mic the other day. It's been over 3 years since you've been on uh, this show. I don't know if this channel exactly, because you might have been on an episode of Twit after that, but your one and only time as a guest on Components was 3 years ago for DRPR's 10th anniversary.
Yeah, hard to believe it was 3 years ago now. The anniversary itself. And it has been a very busy 3 years.
Yeah. I should also mention before we get too deep into things for regular listeners, this isn't like a weird coup. I'm not going back on my word and taking over the show. It was fully planned. Boingo was going to host tonight and everything, but then Buster, Boingo, and Cody all dropped out at the 11th hour, and I was like, well, fuck, I don't want to have to reschedule this, so I guess I'm just talking to Jake on my own tonight. But that's fine, because you and I have literally pulled all-nighters chatting before, so we could probably get a podcast happening.
It's true. I am verbose. I will talk about many things for extended periods of time. And if you listeners out there are a fan of podcasts, I am going to hope that you are a fan of people talking about a great many things for extended periods of time.
Yeah, hopefully you got a good long commute ahead of you, or like, I don't know, maybe you're like me and you listen to your podcast while DoorDashing now. But because it had been so long, I actually did something a little different for me, at least since I've come back to the show. And I did research for this episode. I went back and rewatched your last appearance, or re-listened to your last appearance on the podcast. And I also rewatched the last 3 episodes of Power Reviews and the deeper looks on Once and Always, and then all the videos you did for your new channel, which we'll certainly talk about a little bit later, and just kind of reflected on like how much has happened and how much you and I have changed as people in the last 3 years. Like I even posted kind of a vague Bluesky post about this where I was like, the sort of tone and candor I have towards certain topics in your last episode is wildly different from what I do now. Like we went into even a little bit of this before podcast began, but like I used to really stick up for Hasbro, especially to Power Rangers fans, because I was like, y'all don't know how good you have it now that you're not with Bandai. And like we have regularly on this podcast in the last year just been like, yep, Hasbro's getting in shitified. This sucks. But I did also take down a brief list of like major milestones, like with yourself and also with media we have shared interest in the last 3 years, just to like illustrate to listeners how much has gone on in the last 3 years. Would you be interested in me running all that down? Okay. So since you were last on Modular Components, the Power Rangers 30th anniversary special came out. The Lightning Collection toy line was put to an abrupt and unceremonious hiatus following a ton of QC issues with the last couple waves. Marvel Comics debuted the character of Paul Rabin and cucked Peter Parker harder than ever before. Power Rangers Cosmic Fury came out and ended Power Rangers as we know it. I left YouTube because I felt extremely unsatisfied with the medium and didn't want to pursue a career as a creator anymore. And also at the same time left this podcast. The last 3 episodes of Database Rangers Power Reviews came out, ending an era of your life. Mary Jane Watson took on the superhero identity of Jackpot in the
Yes.
comics. Your second child was born.
Mm.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem came out. Marvel Comics introduced a new Ultimate Universe where Peter Parker doesn't become Spider Man until he and MJ are married and in their 30s with kids. A new Spider Man cartoon debuted to
Okay.
middling or controversial reception, depending on who you ask. You began a new channel focused on activism and getting
Mhm.
more involved in local communities and legislature. Image Comics' Skybound Studio got the rights to make Transformers comics and released one of the most well received books in the franchise's history during its 40th anniversary. TMNT celebrated its 40th anniversary that same year. Doctor Who celebrated its 60th anniversary. Super Sentai celebrated its 50th. I rejoined this channel as just a host, only because I missed my friends, to be honest. Mary Jane Watson took on the identity of Venom in the comics. Playmates Toys licensed the rights to make Power Rangers toys from Hasbro and released a bunch of MMPR slop. And somewhere along the way, you and I both managed to finally get the same amount of gray in our facial
Uh,
hair.
I was not expecting you to catch up with me on that one.
Yeah. Well, it's more like you caught up to me because I went gray very early. You always had less hair on the top of your head than me, but you had more color than me for a good couple of
Yeah.
years.
The beard's been sneaking it in more and more in recent years. Um, and certain things I think also get a little disguised through power reviews because especially with those final episodes, I filmed various scenes literally years apart from each other. So like there's probably even like scenes within episodes where it's like, huh, some of his hair grew back between shots. That's interesting. Um,
But like as you point out in the final episode,
yeah.
the Day of the Dumpster review, there's scenes where characters literally change their
Yep.
entire outfits between shots, and like it's a thing I never noticed with that episode until you pointed it out. So I'm sure there's Power Rangers fans who watch your show and do not notice how wildly different your hair
Well,
may
I
look in
also I
between
gotta give a big
shots.
shout out to my friend Seamus Kelly, who did an awesome like series of articles that ended up shaping a good chunk of my analysis for the Day of the Dumpster review because he was the one who did that series of articles about
Mm.
the supposed like third pilot of the third version of Day of the Dumpster and kind of put all the pieces together of, oh, this was taken from that episode, this was taken from that episode, that's how that all got put together. And so I recognize that although due to the timeline it wouldn't make sense for database to have um, known about that particular article, he is pedantic enough that he would have likely spotted a number of those things if he was really digging into it and looking at it.
Yeah. He's the kind of character that would just watch that episode so much he'd start to figure it out.
Yeah. And, it's the sort of stuff where, like, yeah, maybe if I'd watched Dark Warrior a few more times, I might have noticed that more explicitly. If I was thinking of it in that time frame, in that mind space. But I don't spot everything, and I'm not going to pretend that my encyclopedic knowledge and attention to detail has improved
Mm.
with age.
Yeah.
I cut my teeth in the Power Rangers fandom as being that trivia guy. Um, but I've just so much stuff has happened now over the course of the 30 years of the franchise and the 40 years of my life. And I'm not going to pretend to be half as good as I used to, especially when it comes more recent stuff. Um, where for many of those episodes, I was just doing a live reaction and then not doing a whole lot of rewatching because I was so focused on analyzing the older episodes I was already covering for my series. But I used to know every single monster name. I could tell you the number of every episode. You give me a number from 1 to 700, I could tell you exactly which episode it was. Now I might be able to, but I'd have to think about it a little bit more, and I can't guarantee my accuracy like I used.
All right, well, let's just try it. 422.
422. Okay, so that would have been missing it. That would have been somewhere in Wild Force. So tired right now. Let's see here. I do my little analysis of my brain. So let's see there. Did 422, right? Okay.
Yep.
So let's see. 30 minus 4 gives me 8, gives me 2. That would be 8 minus 6. So I think that would have been fourth episode of Wild Force Never Give Up. There we go. I still got it.
Hey, you got it.
It
I
took me a
did
moment, but I
actually
still
pull
got
that
it.
up. That's great.
Uh,
That's also I also chose that number off the
nice,
top of my head,
nice.
and that is one of my favorite
So,
Wild Force
that's
episodes.
the if you think you can't still do
Uh,
something, never give up. So I do still have it to a degree. Um,
yeah, but it's also like it is far from the main focus of your life now, and while you're incredibly well versed in the show, there's a lot of auxiliary media to Power Rangers that has come out in the last few years. Like, you've admitted you're far behind on the comics, and I don't think you're playing Fortnite this season, are you?
no, no, I have not played any Fortnite at any point. I'm not. I'm not really a gamer. Unless you count like playing solitaire and Sudoku on my phone. That's my extent of gaming for the most part. Um,
Yeah, it's weird to say this to someone, but I am more of a gamer
yeah,
than you are. And yet I have never touched Fortnite either. And Power Rangers is not something that would entice me to get into Fortnite if I'm being perfectly
it's
honest.
also not
But
every guy.
it,
Like the
it,
whole
it
or third person, first person shooter, third person shooter style of game. I'm just that's it's not my that's not my jam personally. Um,
mm. See, I can have fun with that, but I've never been a big
that
online
too.
multiplayer guy. I don't want to fight random people who are undoubtedly going to be better at the game than I am. Give me a somewhat dumb computer to go up against. I'll have a good time. But if you tell me I got to fight real people, that's
I've also
scary.
just like I don't have the hand eye coordination to navigate those styles of games. Well. And I've never taken the time to develop that.
Mhm.
And beyond even that, dude, I've got arthritis. I'm not gonna try and wreck my hands
Oh,
like that. Um, I've had arthritis since I was 25.
that's fair.
I keep it pretty normal.
Okay, so you probably have
No,
told
no,
me about that
I've
before,
had
and I just forgot
arthritis
about it. I thought that was new
for the
information
last
for a
15
second.
years. Which means that I was doing all of those power review stunts with arthritis. Well managed arthritis. So you
Oh
see
my
what you can
god.
still do when you're able to manage things well. I did get
Mhm. And I think that really is the key that we've both been trying to work towards unlocking for the last few years. With you wrapping up power reviews and trying to go into other avenues of your life, and
yeah,
with me throwing in the towel on YouTube and um, trying to figure out who I am as a person without that.
yeah. And there was a like during this is only last year in 2024. It felt like there was sort of a spate of um, YouTube retirements going on around that time. Um,
Mhm. Oh, it was spooky. I remember because I I announced at the start
right.
of December of 23 that I was retiring. And then I made that whole last month of videos, like a prolonged retirement video. And then I think my final video as the Vacuuminator came out on like New Year's Eve or the day before. And the next day, it was like three YouTubers who were bigger than I was ever gonna be. We're all like, yeah, I'm done. I'm out. Bye. And I was like, what the fuck? I did not want to start a trend here.
Yeah, and I don't even know like what happened in many of those cases. Like in even within our narrow zone of tokusatsu focused creators. I remember I think Japanime just kind of vanished. Remember he was doing a lot of stuff for a while and just kind of dropped off the planet. And I don't actually know what happened. I didn't really know the guy first.
that's always the spookiest cases too, is people who like don't announce they're retiring or say like, "Hey, I got really busy, but I want to get back to this." The people who just stop, it's always like,
Yeah,
hmm,
and he may have posted something and I just
yeah.
missed it. 'Cause, I didn't follow him super closely, but I did watch a good number of his reviews. But yeah, he just kind of stopped. I know Orange Ranger had a temporary retirement, and then has largely returned to try and finish up his existing projects and is now focusing more on his gaming channel instead.
And I think that is the thing, is a lot of us tend to get like tunnel visioned or pigeonholed into this idea of, I have created this persona, so if I am doing this career, I have to make what I'm doing fit within that persona.
Yeah.
And part of me retiring was kind of acknowledging that like the persona and the character I had crafted as the Vacuuminator, even though I wasn't doing a narrative like you did, that
Right.
that version of me needed to go away. That needed to be over. Um,
Yeah.
and at the time, I felt like that meant, okay, I have to get away from all this. I have to quit cold turkey, and I have to stop like butting in on every single topic of discussion in these fandoms I'm in. And it took a whole year of kind of just casting around trying to figure out who I was without that, to realize like, no, there were parts of that that I still liked. There were still things I enjoyed doing. I still like having the fandom conversations and my funny little rants on social media every once in a while. I still like taking photos of toys and posting them for people to see. I still like being on podcasts and chatting with my friends. I just don't have enough energy or passion to put into making like highly opinionated videos
Yeah.
about media or toys. And moreover than that, I don't feel like I have the skill or the proficiency in order to be able to compete with today's class of content creators on that level. And like, there's a certain part of my brain that's like, well, if I can't compete, then why am I even trying? Which I know is toxic, but like that's just how my brain works.
And like I'm not gonna pretend to be, like super great on a lot of this stuff. Like I was always, a very small creator. I focused on accomplishing a task that I had set out for myself, and I committed to completing that task. Um, and then once the task was done, you know, then I could evaluate what I want to do from there. But in the doing of it, I got to the end and I'm like, no, I've accomplished what I set out to do. I'm kind of, I feel confident being done with this. As much as, you kind of still want to, keep going on that train of, oh, I've made this life for I've made this name for myself doing this specific thing. And this is what people know from me for. This is what people expect from me. This is what people want me to continue doing to a certain extent. But also recognizing that you don't need to do that forever. You don't need to be just one person. You can be whichever version of yourself feels correct in that moment in time. And I think
Mhm. Which I think is a very courageous way to look at it, honestly. Not to like pat us on the back, but like, I think there was probably a contingency of people who watched your videos, especially towards the end, the people who had hung on for the longest time, who may have had an attitude of like, okay, well, once he finishes this storyline nonsense, then he can just start reviewing regularly again, and I'll get videos every week, and it'll be better. He'll go back to doing regular episode reviews. And I I don't speak for everybody, obviously, but in my own head, I was very much thinking like, no, this is a project that he will complete, and there will be an end point, and it will be over. And getting to see that will be something special. It'll be something that I'll be thankful I was there for. And I toot your horn all the damn time, but I got to be honest, that is how I feel. Like rewatching those last 3 episodes today, I was trying to shoot some toy photography while I was doing that, but there were several points where I just had to stop what I was doing and sit down and kind of watch and marvel at like, God damn, he really fucking did it. He really made it happen, and
at
it
least I
doesn't look
accomplished
half
not looking
bad.
half bad. And I do think I like that there was sort of the
Yeah.
expectation was there that it was going to come to an end. Like I had been very clear on that for years. And so when it did finally hit, I think that there was this really nice moment of shared catharsis. That feeling of I had the satisfaction with having achieved, what I set out to do. The audience had the satisfaction of, seeing this thing that they had been invested in for so many finally reach conclusion as well. Yeah, I still find it kind of amazing that like, there were people in the chat who on when the on the premiere, and they were talking about how like, oh my god, I'm crying right now. Oh, I can't believe this is the end. Oh, I'm gonna miss this series so much. And that was just kind of amazing to have that experience and to know that, I honored what people had been looking for from the series and what people had come to expect from the series. Obviously, it was never going to be, a full television show production quality level kind of thing. But yeah,
But regardless of that, you still manage to touch all these people's lives and make all these connections, form all these bonds. Like without power reviews, you and I don't meet because I like it's been so long now, I could be misremembering slightly, but if I remember correctly, like the way you and I met was you were somewhat trying to advertise the show with Morphin Legacy, and you started coming to their tiny chats. And I had been there hanging out, just like looking for a new friend group because there'd been a big falling out with the previous one I was in. Um, and you and I met, and we would like several times just take over that for an hour chatting about Power Rangers and whatever else. And after a few weeks of that, I remember going like, I should actually watch some of his videos. And I think it was the Prince Takes Night video was out at that time. That was the most recent episode. So I watched that and I remember just instantly falling in love with the show.
yeah, it's
And I had been keeping up with it and like always trying to do things to like keep us in contact ever since.
it was a labor of love, and well, also a labor of obsession and artistic fixation and a bunch of other things. Stubbornness. We could also say it was a labor of stubbornness. Huh. But
But at the end of the day,
and I'm glad
it was an
that I
impressive
was able
creative
to complete it.
project.
Um, and it was also just one of the reasons that, I feel like I can step away from it now, without like distancing myself from it or anything. Um, is that so much of the character arc of Database Ranger um, was a story of self actualization that reflected a journey that I was on for myself. So, him achieving that by the end of the series allowed for me to achieve it as well. And I don't know if I'd be doing the kinds of things I'm doing right now if I had failed to accomplish that goal. So much of what I'm doing now in terms of um, civic engagement and volunteering and trying to raise awareness for these causes and pushing myself to make, my world a better place, my community a better place, and the world at large a better place. So much of it is driven by I was able to do this impossible thing that nobody else had ever really done. And so maybe I might be able to do some other impossible thing as well. And I really lean into that. And I felt so strongly that if I failed in achieving the goal of finishing this thing that I was so passionate about, then I would be setting myself up for failure in future endeavors as well. And that was just a mindset that I had. And I'm glad that, you know, it did end with me really completing it. Although, arguably, there was always the question of, should I walk away from this? Should I just stop and move on to other things? Would it have been healthier to do so? Possibly. I'm not going to deny it. It's entirely possible it would have been a healthier thing for me to just walk away when it got tough. But it didn't feel like it would be true to who I am as a person. Um, and I felt like it was going to be one of those things that would haunt me if I did. And that was something that I basically was struggling with, like, every day for those last few years of the series, especially during those last like 2 years of the series. After
Yeah.
the 10-year anniversary, when it was just like, I can't believe this thing's been going on for over 10 years. I only meant for it to go on for like three and a half, if that. I was hoping to be done with this thing by the time I was 30. And I ended up finishing it at the age of 39. It was so much. Um, and I know that I conveyed that through a number of avenues in the channel.
Mhm.
I think probably most prominently in the 9-year anniversary video where I did the focus on Bo Burnham's Inside, which is a video I'm still very proud of, even if it's didn't get a whole bunch of views, because it was me trying for something very different, that was also very personal. But I was conveying, like, yeah, this is kind of killing me a little bit that I haven't been able to finish this, and I don't want this to stretch on forever. And now here I am, a year out from having completed it, and feeling very at peace with that. Um,
Which is it's interesting to hear you talk about having this sense of fulfillment and completion from having achieved your goal, because I have a very similar sort of sense about things from, even though I didn't have as like clear and concrete a goal as you did, I essentially never completed my goal. I have often been very upfront with the fact that, like, I got into YouTube as a kid because I realized, like, oh, playing with toys could be my job. I could get paid to talk about this stuff I like. I don't actually have to work. Like, I got into YouTube for like the most cynical reasons possible, and I never even got close to achieving that goal. It was always
yeah,
like a passion project that I kept telling myself would turn a profit eventually. And I eventually got to a point where I had to say, like, it's either not going to happen or it's going to happen and I'm going to be living in a box. And I don't want to live in a box. I got to figure out another life for myself. And in the 2 years since then, I've kind of gotten to a point where I have a much more stable and a much more normal life with much smaller aspirations. And I'm sure to some people that would seem very sad to an extent, but for me, it's very much like, okay, I have a much better sense of where I'm at and what my future will be than I ever have had in my life before. And it makes me feel so good just to go like, okay, I know what my job is. I know where I live. I know what my next paycheck is going to be. I know where my next meal is coming from. And I know that if I wanted to, I could have that basically be the same for the rest of my working life. I could always screw that up somehow, or I could change that up in a positive way. But right now, things feel much more stable than they were during like my late teen years when I was working these awful food service and retail jobs, telling myself, well, it's just till people start donating to my Patreon. It'll be fine in a few months. Don't worry.
it's I feel like everybody's sort of journey to finding themselves in adulthood is going to be different. I talked about the series being my personal journey of self actualization. But it doesn't need to be accomplishing some crazy project that maybe some people will see and most people won't. But it can be also just having the confidence in yourself to know that it's time to walk away and recognizing the value of things outside of that work. There's so many different ways to get to that point. Um, and finding stability, like, as much as people, kind of, um, they have there's the idea of settling for things. Oh, I couldn't do this, so I settled for that. Ba, 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 ba. Is how people frame things a lot of the times. But stability is very freeing. People,
Mhm. To an extent, it's like,
yeah,
my man, have you ever actually tried settling? Have you ever, like, sat your ass down and gone like, "Ooh, this is nice. I like this cushion."
yeah. Like, yeah, I'm a married teacher with two kids and a mortgage. Like, that's pretty solidly settled. Um,
Mhm.
but that's also, a big accomplishment as well, especially, for, our respective. I forget if we're are we both millennials? I forget if I know I'm a millennial.
I'm technically Gen Z by, like, birth year, but I've always related
Okay,
to
I
the
knew there
millennial
were
plight
that we
more.
were pretty separated on that front, so I couldn't quite remember. 'Cause I know I'm an
Mhm.
elder.
It's funny, you're like an elder
Yeah, I
millennial,
wasn't
I'm an
quite
elder
sure
Gen
where the
Z.
cutoff was for younger millennials slash elder Gen Z. Um,
I think it's like literally 95 or
okay,
96, and
okay.
I'm 97.
Um, that sounds approximately right. That age range is also always shifting. I think I've even heard it like nine.
Mhm.
It's hard to say, but yeah, it's it's really also amazing to experience if you've had those kind of struggles in your like teens or 20s. Um, one thing that I shared in my most recent video about the National Union of the Homeless on my new channel, Let the Be Superheroes, was I briefly shared that for a good chunk of my 20s, I was pretty well near the poverty line. I was not making much
Mhm.
money, and we were only able to make rent because MJ and I were sharing a one bedroom apartment, so we had two incomes as a result. We supported each other, and we lived lean. And we had savings. Because our parents supported us through college, and so we saved
Yeah.
what we got from our like internships and side jobs. Um, we worked with what we had. But like I remember, I was probably around like 25, and working retail at Kohl's. I developed like a sebaceous cyst on my collarbone. That was extremely painful, and I was nervous about going to the doctor because I didn't have health insurance. But I went to a place that had charity care where it's like, oh, write down how much you make, and there's a scaling amount of how much you pay, and I made little enough that I didn't end up having to pay for it. Um, and I think that says something for how little I was making. Um, I don't think I
Mm.
truly appreciated at the time, like how we were kind of getting by on the skin of our teeth to a
Yeah.
certain extent for a stretch there.
Yeah. And I
I'd
should
mentioned,
acknowledge, like, I
yeah,
am I am lucky, very lucky in a sense that, like, I've never quite been there. I've been out of work for prolonged periods of time, but I have
yeah,
always lived with my parents until very recently. Like, I moved into my home apartment in January, and I've had a job this entire time. And not only that, but I've also been door dashing on the
always.
side. So I'm doing really okay now, especially
Wow,
because I live at the same apartment complex I work for, so I get a discount on rent. Like, I am doing really well for someone my age. But there is always that fear of, like, well, I could lose my job tomorrow. I
evicted.
could be out. I could be given the oh, what's the word? Not foreclosed on. What's the oh, my lease. Yeah, I could be evicted within a few months after that. And then, like, I own my
Yeah,
car, but and I could probably move back in with my mom, but, like, that house is already very different from what it was when I was living there. So I don't think that would be very comfortable. Like
Yeah.
I am officially in a zone where it's like, yeah, no, I'm doing fine, but I could very easily not be. And it's always interesting to observe that dichotomy.
And it's crazy to um, thinking back on like what cost of living even was like 15 years ago. And when I was like, I I
Mhm.
I, I want to emphasize like how crazy rents and mortgages have gotten. Um, how difficult that peace of mind is now to find. Like you were saying, how you got a great discount on your apartment. But back in like 2008, I got an apartment with two other people. I was very lucky. We got a three-bedroom apartment. It was my last year um, of college, and during the course of that year, my two roommates both moved out. But I had them sign a rental agreement at the beginning of the school year, so they
Mhm.
still had to pay rent throughout the rest of the year. So I had a three apartment to myself, and I was paying a third of the rent. And the rent on
Oh
that
wow.
apartment was $650 a month. So I was spending like 217 a month on a
Wow.
three-bedroom apartment that I had to myself. That's something that you can't imagine happening nowadays.
That's amazing. Because, like, yeah, no, I'm in a one bedroom that
Yeah.
was completely renovated right before I moved in. Like, we're talking not just new appliances, but new floors, fresh paint on the walls, completely redone bathroom, all that kind of shit. But if I had just been a
Yeah, for
regular
a week.
person moving in here, I believe it would be
Yeah,
1150 a month. But because I
yeah,
work here, my discount gets it down to about 9 or 850, I
yeah.
think. And again, because I work here, we get paid every other week. So they split my rent and they just take half of it out of each paycheck. And
There you go.
on months where there's
Good
free
stuff.
paydays within the month, that third payday, I don't gotta pay rent.
Yeah.
So, like, it seems like I'm getting a really good deal, and I am, but
Yeah.
also I'm still paying more per payday than you were per month in college.
And I'm not gonna lie, it's not like it was an amazing apartment or anything. Like, the heat was a furnace in the living
Mhm.
room that shut down in January for a week. Um, that was how I discovered what olive oil looks like when it freezes. That was
Oh, I'm not sure
it
if I
turns
want to see
opaque.
that.
It's interesting.
What the fuck?
Just take a
Okay.
bottle of olive oil, toss it in a freezer if you want to ever see what that looks like. But that's what it looked like in my cabinet. Yeah.
Oh, I could literally do that right now, but I
This,
don't
this
think
is
I
this
will.
is giving you some insight into what my life was like pre-Power before I began.
uh, which is interesting because I feel like we've been spending the last 20 minutes trying
Yeah.
to like tiptoe into what your life has become
Yes.
post power reviews. Because we've mentioned the new channel a couple times, but we haven't really gotten into it. It's called Let's Be Superheroes for folks who haven't heard. But it's been a really interesting project to see you sort of spearhead, and it's been very um inspiring to me in a number of ways because it's shown that like and I've always known this to an extent, but you always see so much more, I guess, shine put on productions like this, whereas like you're bringing the same like
Yeah.
guerrilla filmmaking production vibe that Power Reviews had to a collab channel. And you're also making it much more about actual issues and how to help deal with them within the confines of being just one person in the world. And it's very interesting to see like that kind of creativity from a person who has mostly worked in critical analysis and fiction up till this point. And I'm genuinely a fan of it. Like, I'm not just saying it to be like, oh, we're friends. I like this thing because you're doing it. Like, I do really enjoy, especially the videos you make, but I also do watch the videos by the other creators, and they're pretty good. Um, And it's also just it's interesting as somebody who has been tracking your career as a video maker for so long to see that like you are still evolving. Like in the latest video on homelessness, you have an outside shot of you just doing like some interstitials talking about like things that you couldn't really fit into interviews here or there or connecting certain topics to one another. And it's just this simple static shot of you standing outside talking, but it's also like one of the most visually resplendent shots I've ever seen from you because it's in a really nice area of, I assume, downtown. It's very well lit on a nice sunny day, and you're just dressed very well, and it fits perfectly for the video. I was very impressed just by the that one shot.
Well, I appreciate that, and if you want some little behind the scenes, uh, you know, dishing on that particular bit of the video, um,
Mhm.
as far as why I'm well dressed, I literally shot that during my lunch break.
Was that on
I was a
campus?
little bit. I was a little bit from where I was a little bit away from where I work, but not that far. I just like I had my camera in my car. I ran down to my car, which was parked over by a small local park, and I have a power inverter plugged into the the cigarette lighter in my car. I ran the cable out of my car, set up my camera,
Yeah.
and recorded just during my lunch break.
But see, that's what I mean. That's that guerrilla filmmaking spirit that you practically
Yeah,
created for yourself while making power reviews. And seeing you bring that to real issues is very exciting and very inspiring for me as somebody who like I certainly have very strong progressive beliefs, but I've always been very timid about actually getting involved with the system. And since you started up this channel and I've kind of taken the focus of my life off of doing videos and stuff like that, I've been looking for other stuff to do. And so this has helped inspire me like, okay, it doesn't take that much effort. You can just listen to your city council meetings online and you can send emails because all the council members have public emails. Anybody who's an elected official has a public email, and of course they themselves probably doesn't read it, but they have an aide who will, and they will more often than not actually get back to you. You can go to like these planning meetings where they're deciding like, hey, here's how we want to here's a couple options for how we want to expand this area of downtown or this feature of the city's transportation system. Everybody gets to vote on which option we're going to take, and we'll take all of that information we get into consideration. Or just like, hey, there's plenty of resources out there if you want to find out if there's a certain march going on in your neighborhood, and maybe you want to be involved with that. You could go and look into that right now. And having just like those clear reminders that like this is all very simple and easy stuff all of us can do, and it only takes a few hours out of your day. um, I think takes a lot of the stress out
yes.
of being a
And,
politically involved
like,
person.
and that's what I'm trying to convey to people. It's remarkable how many things occur in our world. It's really just a number of people taking action. And so if you get in on one of those in one of those avenues, you can be making a difference. Um and you can make connections surprisingly quickly if you just take those steps. It can be very intimidating to do that, especially for someone who might be extremely online, as we kind of are as video creators. Um, very introverted, neurodivergent. There's definitely
Mhm.
challenges with that. But the people are there. They are accessible. The groups are there. They are accessible. Like I once called and it's so much more accessible at the local level too. Like I've made calls over the years to my senators about this, that, or the other thing, and I'm pretty much every time getting a voicemail. That's pretty standard. I called a local assemblyman who is not my assemblyman. And I got a
Mhm.
call back from that assemblyman and had a full conversation with. Not that many people are calling the state representatives directly, at least
Wow.
to my is my perspective. Um,
Mhm. That's why you'll hear organizers and people say when things go down and people express that they want to get involved, like even just as silly as an example of it is, but for a recent
yeah.
thing, when
Um,
Jimmy Kimmel got suspended for a couple months, I saw people saying, "Send physical letters to Disney. It will scare the shit out of them."
and it ended up only being a couple days for him. That mass
Yeah.
boycott of Disney was something that actually took a real that was a real impact that happened very quickly. There's so many things
Mhm.
where you just all you gotta do is just take the step, and it's hard to take the step if you're not used to it. It's just like
Yeah.
it's hard to make it down to the gym if you're not in the routine of doing that. You get into the practice of exercise and it becomes easier over time to consistently do it. You get into the practice of engaging in your community and in your local government and it becomes easier. I even attending town board meetings, like that was a new thing for me to go check out. And it was tricky at first to, be like, oh, is tonight a really good night? But I got stuff going on with the kids. Maybe I'll try it next time. But, and you keep putting it off. But then I did manage to go. And then I wasn't able to make it maybe the next time. But then
Hmm.
in another case, I was. And now I'm starting to become able to go there a bit more regularly because it's become a little bit more routine. Um, you know,
Yeah. And I think a great motivator is also just like people need to remember if you don't get in that habit, if you don't
yep,
become that person who goes regularly, then there's always the chance that somebody you completely disagree with will become that person. And I don't say that just to like fearmonger or give motivation. Like this is something I've actually literally experienced in the last few months where I can't make it to the city council meetings. I just straight up can't. They start at 5:30. I get off at 5. I live
right.
right next to downtown, but it would take me 45 minutes just to get to town hall because of the way our city is laid out. But I listen to the meetings the next day on YouTube every week. And I recently discovered because somebody went and presented at one of the meetings to the city council, like, hey, here's all these issues with
No.
our public transportation. Here's why it sucks. You ought to
Yeah.
just scrap it and get Elon Musk robo taxis in here. And that made me so mad that I wrote like
Good.
a Twitter super Fred length rant and sent it to the entire city council and was like, don't fucking do this. And literally 2 days later, I never checked to see if it was like actually the councilwoman or one of her aides, but the councilwoman for my actual district got back to me and was like, "Hey, this guy is a regular. He gives these kind of things all the time, but here's all the reasons why this definitely won't happen." Like we literally passed a law the year they started testing those things that says like you can't have a vehicle operating in our county without a literal human driver in it, which would completely defeat the point of that company. They're trying to save money by not having actual
Yeah.
drivers. So it's
Exactly.
just not going to happen
Like
unless the law changes. And as far as I can tell,
still,
nobody on
you
this
know,
council wants to change that
I'm
law.
lucky in terms of like I'm like a 2 minute drive from my local town hall. Um, I'm I'm in the suburb. I I'm really close.
Mhm.
It's tight with the kids' bedtime to get there right at the start, but I can generally get there so long as I coordinate with my spouse. I can get there pretty reliably. And showing up consistently also gets recognition too. Like people who are running these groups that are very small notice when there's somebody who shows up consistently. Even if it might not you might not have those initial connections. I've now through Food Not Bombs and National Union of the Homeless made some connections, and I'm now helping out, or at least starting to help out with the media team that represents um, National Union of the Homeless, the Nonviolent Medicaid Army, and the Poor People's Campaign in terms of the local chapters here. And so I'm helping out with filming where I can, when I can. Um, and I got involved by just showing up and saying, "Hey, I'm doing this project. I'm interested in learning more. What could is in part about educating other people, but also about having a project that I can use as a self motivator. Much like how Power Reviews was sort of a project of self actualization. Let's Be Superheroes is a project of community engagement, where I'm having this reason to go there and connect to that I can use as a justification to myself of, you know, no, I'm not going to put it off because I need to do it for this project that I'm doing. And I'm very project oriented as an individual. Like most of my socialization takes place through projects. If I don't have a project, it's very difficult for me to actually like hang out with people. Like, yeah, we don't hang out all that often. And it's part of that is I'm a busy guy, and part of it is you know, the way to hang out with me is okay, we're going to set up something. Either it's been a long time, let's catch up, or it's stuff like this where we have a dedicated thing that we are doing and talking about. Right.
Yeah. And typically we also have to like schedule it out a couple of weeks in advance, which is definitely like not the traditional idea of friendship, but it works for
And I
us.
think that it becomes sort of how friendships work as you get older too. For some people, not for
Yeah.
everybody. Obviously, for people who have their routine hangouts, they go to happy hour on every Friday or whatever. Good on them. They see their buddies for the big sports ball game, whatever it might be, each week. Um,
I won't lie, there is part of me that's sort of envious of that lifestyle that does sort of
yeah,
want that to a degree. And I've made inroads, especially since um leaving having a dedicated chunk of
yeah,
time for being a YouTuber out of my life. I've tried to find stuff like that to fill that time, but it's very hard to find that, especially in a world where we have fewer and fewer third
yeah. For
places every
me,
day.
the big thing was theater when I was younger. I would,
Mhm.
be part of a show, and that was my social circle. The people who I was working with on the show. I was hanging out with people in the context of rehearsals and set builds, and that was where I was socializing. I was socializing while working on that project. Um, most of the friends that I've seen and stayed in touch with over the course of the last, decade or so have been people who I brought in to work on power reviews, and that was how I would generally get to hang out with them. I'd bring them over to do some filming, and then we'd hang out for a while. And I do very little socializing outside of that. So now I have this new project that gets me out there and gets me connecting. And I'm still kind of adjusting to this new mode. Like I'm getting involved with my teachers union, and I'll go to the get-togethers, and they're not necessarily like my vibe. It's usually like getting together. They'll down at a local like beer garden or what have you. Each you come in, you get a ticket for a free drink, and then people all just kind of hang out and chat. Um, and very few of the people who I work with directly are
Mhm.
actually there, so I don't necessarily know a huge number of people, but I'm starting to become more comfortable in that space. And just because, and that's a big part of that is because I'm making a dedicated effort towards, being involved towards the project of being involved in my unit to find out what positive actions can I contribute to? And the socialization kind of comes all the way. And that socialization makes a lot of things easy. You develop friendships, you develop, these relationships. Um, you walk in, it's like, oh, hey, I saw you last time. How are you doing this time? Some of the stuff I'm talking with with the assemblymen on, and this is me. I don't know if any progress is being made on it. I check in with him every few months, being like, "Hey, I've done this. What's going on with that? Am I contributing to this? Can I contribute to this more?" And now I'm starting to communicate more with my union members to be like, "Hey, I've been talking to the assemblyman about this universal pension project, which I was inspired to research based off of our rally to reform our pension system, you know, back in spring. And now I want to see if the stuff that I've been doing with the assemblyman might be of value as a whole. And I'm hoping that that might be something that I can connect with the union leadership on and see some more progress on. And that would be kind of a major influencing force on legislation if you have like a major state union, a teachers union for an entire state is one of the most prominent that a state tends to have. So I'm looking at these avenues for how some very meaningful legislation could potentially be passed in my state. It hasn't been drafted or anything. This is I've just done preliminary research on it, but I'm pushing to see what can happen and what needs to happen to get to that next step, and to get to that next step, and to get to that next step. And if you're always looking for, okay, what is the next step? What is the next step? What is the next step? You keep moving forward. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, is that I'm continuing to try and find what's that next step? What's that next step? How do we move forward? And it keeps me from getting too bogged down in all the terrible things that are happening out in the world. I'm not going to lie and say that they don't, negatively impact my mental health. That that I'm not affected by them. I absolutely am. But that sense of moving forward towards goal consistently, with the sense that you are actually making progress in those goals, even if you're not sure if you're making that progress in the wider world. Um, it helps keep you going, and there's a satisfaction to that, to knowing that you are starting to difference and providing things that other people might not be providing, adding perspectives that other people might not have due to just having different experience. Like I come back to that universal pension thing. um, when I talked to the assemblyman, it was something that he had mentioned as having an interest in, but had never drafted legislation on. He was just had a passing interest in. And I asked, well, what would need to happen for there to be legislation? Do a lot of research. Do you think that you'd be interested in doing that research? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I could potentially do that. I have no experience with pensions, but I could try. And I worked up a 20-page document going over all the different universal pension systems in other countries, their pros and cons, how I think that it could be administrated at a state level, and the potential benefits that we could see at that state level. And I submitted it to the assemblyman, had a meeting with him about it. And nothing's happened moving forward on that since then, as of yet. But I'm still figuring out what the next step is, and it's something that nobody else was doing, and now is a piece of information that's out there that could be useful in having a type of legislation that I think could a really significant difference in people's lives. And I'm hoping that if I keep pushing, that this could happen. And when you're working on something you're passionate, you can share that with other people. And if you're making connections with other people, that's more people who can also be pushing forward. Like I said, if I connect with my union, that's a group that could be applying pressure. The different campaigns that I'm communicating with the media team, I'm putting that out there. Hey, I think that this could be of real value, and if they agree and are seeing traction on it, they could also be putting efforts behind that. Interested in seeing how far some of these things go and how much of a difference all these groups can make just by having an additional perspective that may not have otherwise been present. I feel like every person can provide a difference that may not have otherwise been present, and that can make a difference in the world that we have.
Mhm. It is a it is definitely a thing that I think a lot of people tend to forget, just like how important being an individual and recognizing others as individuals can be to living a healthy and
Yeah.
productive life within the world. So often we tend to think of the political systems and our leaders as something that's over there, something that's other than us. And the thing we don't realize is no matter how much red tape or how many security guards are between us and them, that's still a real person. You could still theoretically walk up to that person and talk to them and shake their hand and I don't know, maybe punch them in the gut as well. But it's it's a thing that I have certainly had to remind myself of in the last year of like just because all these big scary things are happening doesn't mean you can't make small good things happen right in front of you. You can
Yeah.
still get up every day and smile and try and greet people and be kind to them and help them and then go out and use that attitude to positively affect the world, whether that be just at your own day to day job or getting involved in your local legislature.
And a lot of it in terms of that ability to connect to those people who seem so distant. A lot of that kind of evolves out of probably for me my experience as a Power Rangers fan. Like Power Morphicon, for example, was my first time seeing a lot of these people who had only seen on TV actually in person, and that kind of removed a sort of
Mm.
level of divide there. I'm realizing that these are people who you can meet and talk to and befriend and form bonds with. Um, that you know, my in my case, my particular skills with Power Rangers trivia, led to me being able to contribute as part of the staff and see these actors over and over again to the point where they're like, "Oh yeah, you're cool. We can trust you to make sure things are going well." And that's again, you show up, you're consistent, you treat people
Mhm.
as people, and you are suddenly in positions that you wouldn't expect yourself to be in. I was honestly so close to honestly being the event coordinator for Power Morphicon for a stretch there. And then like COVID happened, everything fell apart in that. I think I was actually I think a
Yeah.
friend on staff may have reached out to me about our Morphicon Express, and I just wasn't up for traveling out to Texas on short notice during COVID. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, who would be?
and
But it's also it's interesting that you say that about like conventions and specifically guests at conventions because I feel like that's one area where there definitely is a generational
yeah,
divide between us. Because like not that I'm dismissive towards it, but I've never really been like big into conventions for the guests. I have certainly gone with the idea in my mind of like, okay, I'm going to make time to see this guest and get a photo with them, but it's never been about like, okay, I'm gonna meet them and I'm gonna get to know them or something like that. It's always been just like a an attraction, like a ride you get on at an amusement park. The thing that feels like I'm breaking down these walls of reality for me is meeting people I know from the internet at conventions, like you. Like that year I went to Power Morphicon, I remember specifically I think it was the
yeah.
Saturday you got there, and I was on ball all morning, being like, okay, when are Jake and Seamus going to be here? Because I want to be at the entrance to greet them and say hi. Because I've been talking to these guys online for I don't know how long, and I'm gonna finally get to give them a hug, and that's gonna be great. And it was great that whole weekend. Um, though I've soured towards the Power Rangers
Right.
fandom in general since then, that weekend is still a very
Well,
fun
I think
memory
for
for
me
me.
with the guests specifically was it felt like a way that I could pay back people who had provided me with entertainment and joy through the show, and getting a chance to kind of reciprocate that
Mhm.
and be of service to them. Um, was always one of the deeply satisfying things about being on staff or Power. And a lot of it was also just being in the presence of so many people who shared a common passion. Um, getting to see all the little toys and displays that you're just gonna geek out over. Getting those behind the scenes stories, all that stuff is a lot of fun. But
Oh, definitely.
being in that presence of people who share a common passion and people who produce things that are of such importance to you and importance to your passion, like that maps on that maps on surprisingly well, I think, towards what I'm doing now in terms of meeting people who are like-minded in terms of goals they want to see for society, getting in touch with people who have influence over the world that you experience, and finding ways to connect and bond over that
Mhm.
shared understanding of the world, and to connect and have influence over the shape of the world. One of the things I find really interesting about my relationship with Power Rangers is how I'm always looking at how it maps onto other things in many respects. I mean, that's kind of was a major structural aspect of Power Reviews, was mapping the events of Power Rangers episodes into the events of the story I was telling.
Yeah.
But in a broader sense, like how the philosophy of the show maps onto my personal philosophies of life. Because I found it really interesting as I got older, understanding how different people with very different political views to mine could be so into the same show that I was. That defined so much of my identity and also defines theirs. Um, and I think a certain aspect of it, which I find really interesting because I'm on the autism spectrum, is the recognition or lack of recognition of metaphor in certain respects. Like when I looked at Mighty Morphin and the Power Rangers fighting monsters, I always kind of looked at the monsters as externalized representations of real internal issues that they were facing and overcoming. While other people see it as an actual, physical confrontation with enemies that can be mapped onto their relationships with people who they perceive as being of of an opposition. So that metaphor of whether Power Rangers is about an internal struggle versus an external struggle, and the nature of that struggle, whether it's supposed to be physical or or philosophical, um, and those different interpretations can lead to very different worldviews.
It's interesting that you say that too, because it's like whenever it's come to fiction for the majority of my life, I always viewed the good versus evil struggle as an external thing. But I think as an adult, I have certainly come to be able to pick up on things that are very much meant to be in allegorically internal struggles that are being externalized much easier. And part of that probably does come from watching Power Reviews because I can remember certain episodes where you would talk about that, and I would be like, oh, I never thought of that. But that is a very valid way to look at it now that you've explained it. And I think I'm actually going to go with that interpretation, at least for this material from now on.
And I think that I find it ironic because there's that sort of stereotype of autistic people taking things so literally. And I'm digging into allegories that's just so far removed from most interpretations of the show. Which I
Mhm. Well, you've also always been the guy who reads Power Rangers much more
right.
deeply than anyone else.
And I'm sure I'm not the only one who does these deep readings. I know that I'm probably one of the most outspoken of people when it comes to these particular types of readings of the show. I think that there's still plenty of people who do take inspiration from it, in that metaphorical sense of fighting metaphorical evil rather than seeing other humans as literal evil, but finding those philosophical elements. It's really interesting, and it's interesting seeing how like the actors even we've discussed in the past how many different problematic actors there are out there. But there's that aspect of you got to play a superhero. What do you take away from that?
Yeah, and I think it's also like, and this goes back to what you were talking about earlier with in regards to yourself and how you've been getting
Yeah,
involved in things and how you got involved in Power Morphicon more as a helper than anything. And that is very much your personality type is when you get involved in things you want to be a helper. You don't necessarily want to be a figurehead unless it is a project like Power Reviews. And I think that that very much speaks to who you are as a person and who a lot of these people we have to deal with and worry about in our lives are as people, because something that I've kind of realized in the last couple of years is like two things that hold this very common fact
yeah,
in themselves is being an actor and being a
it's true.
politician are both just inherently egotistical professions. And what you do is you you essentially are a much more selfless person than that. Like you could try and run for office if you wanted to. I think you'd have a decent shot, but that's just not who you are.
I'm not gonna pretend that I have. I'm actually not gonna pretend I haven't considered it and that I don't still think about it, but it would be with specific
Mhm.
goals in mind. Like if I think that would be the correct avenue towards pushing through legislation that I feel strongly about, then I would probably
Yeah.
try and run. Um, if I feel like I could better accomplish those goals, as an advocate rather than a specific as like a legislator, then I'm going to stay in that lane and instead just I think best reflect my views, and that's going to be a calculation to kind of figure out. I've in not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, I'm going to attend my first uh, local Democratic Party meeting,
Oh boy.
and I'm going to kind of see what I learned from that. And that was something where it came down to there was a woman collecting signatures going through our neighborhood, and she was very excited to find a relatively young new couple in the neighborhood. We've only lived here for a few years, and we're only just now 40 with two young children, um, who were registered Democrats. And I feel like to be clear, I am registered with the Democratic Party. That does not mean that I necessarily agree with it in all of its actions. It's mostly that I feel as though out of the two major parties, it's the one that I better align with. And in
I think for most progressive
right,
people, it is a
and
marriage of
in my state,
convenience at this
you
point.
need to be registered with a party in order to vote in that party's primaries. So if I wish to see people who are more aligned with my political views in the party that's most closely aligned with my political views, out of the like two that have representation, then I need to be registered with that party. But I spoke to the woman and said, "Hey, I do phone banking during major elections. I'd absolutely be interested in helping out." So she took down my name and number and email, and said so and so can get in touch with you. And full disclosure, they didn't end up reaching out to me. I reached out to them eventually, and it took a while before they got back to me. And they when they finally did, I got in touch with them. They were like, "Oh, we don't have like anybody who is involved with us who lives in your neighborhood. It would be great to have somebody there who can advocate for us." Blah, blah, blah. Ended up having a conversation on the phone with their vice chair. But again, this was something that only happened because I, reached out to them multiple times, and put myself out there. And that's one of the things, you need to be willing to a certain extent be a little annoying. You need to be willing to try and make contact however many times is necessary in order to actually get involved. And I'm interested in learning what comes of this. Um, maybe that could be if I were to decide to run for a political office later, this could be the start of me forming those connections, or it could be the start of me influencing the party platform at a local, aligning it more closely with my personal value. It could go either way, and that's what I mean. You got to keep looking into, okay, what's going to be the next step from here, because there's always going to be that sort of adjustment as you keep learning things along the way. I've had to keep kind of figuring. I had a broad, like, again, I'll keep going back to power reviews because that's arguably what I was invited on here to talk about. But in power review, I had the overarching plot in mind, but the details you discover in the writing. Um, Episode
Mhm.
87 is a perfect example of that, where that was something that I didn't really have in mind when I first came up with year three. But I was just kind of digging into all these different aspects of their backstories. And I then decided, okay, you know what? At this point, I'm just going to go full bore, do these flashbacks, get to know everybody's backstory all in this one episode. We're getting into all these little details that, were just kind of in the back of my mind in terms of, who these characters were and their backstories. And I decided to make them into actual scenes in the show. Um, but it was something that I didn't foresee would be a plot of an actual episode, until I got to that episode and realized, okay, this is the next step now. You get to that step, to a step before you realize entirely what the next step is. So I'm not making the judgment in terms of, am I going to be running for like a local political office, until I get to know, okay, what's this political party look like? How do these things operate? Um, I tend to try and um, observe things fairly closely before I actually dive in for myself, as best I can, to make sure that when I do take an action, that I'm effective with it, that I'm going to do a good job with. Same thing back when I was active in theater. Like, I asked so many questions about like light design before I did my first light design. Yeah, I worked on a bunch of sets before I did my first set design. I talked to other people who had directed before I directed my first gig. And right now, I'm just going to these town board meetings and just sitting there, not even, taking part in any discussions or anything, but just absorbing what happens and processing what I could be doing. Where's the spots that I could be contributing? And that's when I go from being far more introverted to far more engaged. I'm always very introverted at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's it, it's very I don't know, comforting, I guess is the closest word I can come up with. It's reassuring. There's a better word. It's reassuring to hear you say that kind of stuff because that is very much how I feel. And there is a point where sometimes watching your videos I feel like, "Oh, I could be doing more. Why aren't I?" But that also meets with, just by nature of who we are, you and I are in somewhat introverted people where
Yeah.
I don't know about you necessarily, but I've always felt I'm a more non-confrontational person than I would like to be. And so when it comes to getting involved with
Yeah.
stuff like this, I feel like I have to take baby steps because I'm very scared of making the wrong choice and getting in with the wrong thing. And
Yeah.
even though, when you're looking into an organization that espouses to be fighting homelessness, it's very hard for that to happen. There's always
Yeah.
that little voice in the back of your head that says like, okay, well let's go to one more of these and see how it goes before we start like actually getting involved. And to hear that you also have that kind of thought process does make me feel better about certain things.
Yeah, like with National Union of the Homeless, for example, I tried to be very light on pressure in terms of of the interviews, but still, I was consistent about it. I spoke to Reverend Joe Paparone, who's kind of the leading force of the organization, who I interview in the video. And I learned, I found out about it entirely through Food Not Bombs. I was involved in their Discord,
Mm.
and I saw there was this posting about National Union of the Homeless coming up. They were doing a cookout. I'm like, you know what? I would like to do. I think that that could be a good thing to do a video on because I was originally planning on doing one on the climate activist group Extinction Rebellion, but I hadn't been able to get in touch with them. And so I was wondering if I needed to try and focus on a different group instead. And I saw that pop up, and I'm like, you know what? Let me check out this group. Maybe this could be a potential avenue. And I went there, and I just kind of quietly hung out at that first cookout. Chatted a little bit, and we're like, okay, maybe next time I can come and actually do an interview. I've established that I'm a chill dude, and that and one other thing I did was I made sure that when I went there, I helped pack things up, and that is something I often did at Power More. That was how I actually got to briefly handle the original Phantom Ranger costume.
Mm.
I've stayed for the strike of the convention.
Huh.
Um, And that's something that people notice actually. If you're one of the last people to leave and you help with the closeout, people appreciate that. They appreciate that time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
People always need an extra guy to stack chairs, and they always appreciate it.
And I'm good at Tetrising things into the backs of vans. As a guy
Mm.
who owned a few minivans because they kept dying on me back in college. I was the guy who everybody else would rely upon for to move out of their apartment. So I got very good at being able to load things into my van and haul stuff and navigate things like that. So I helped like break down the tents in there and talked more with the people so that next time I came by and it was very apologetic like, oh, so sorry I didn't really get to talk to people about the interviews. I wanted I appreciated that you helped out last time, and I wanted to make sure that this time, maybe you might be able to talk to some of these people. But everybody was all really busy, so there was like one person agreed to it, but then she was very busy, and she finally got to meet with me at the very end of the cookout after I'd helped pack things up, and I had my camera out for a long time, and she was able to be like, "Oh, I know you've been waiting for me. I'll come, talk to you for 10, 15 minutes." And she ended up being one of the best interviews. Because she had so much information and such
Mm.
very raw stories to talk about. Um, and that was when I was like, okay, yeah, this is something I neatly make sure that I do. And I just maintained that consistency of following up and being like, hey, I know that this is coming up. Do you think this could be a good opportunity for an interview? And he's like, yeah, yeah, I think I can do that. Or if it was no, I'd be like, oh, no, no problem. Do you need any help? And I think that's an important thing too. Like when you are asking somebody to do something, if they can't be like, okay, well, is there anything I can do to help you? Just create that reciprocity. I think is also valuable. Are also things that I try to. And those can form some very good relationships. Because I hate asking for people to
Yeah.
do things for my projects. It's something that I have to like push myself through to make happen. Um, yeah, that was probably one of the reasons that some of the filming for Power Reviews took as long as it did because I felt like I was bothering my friends asking for them to keep filming, trying to make time to film for my little YouTube show instead of taking care of stuff that they had going on in their lives. Anytime that I was calling them, it was because I wanted something out of them, and that was a hard thing to deal with. Um, yeah, and I felt like I wasn't taking care of those
Yeah.
friendships as well as I could have. That's something that I still feel kind of bad about. But I also kind of recognize that that's also a way that I function and discuss in order for me to effectively like actualize things and make things happen. It needs to be in the context of some larger project, and then I can.
Yeah. I mean, like, it goes back to something I said way earlier in this podcast is I stopped being a YouTuber because I didn't see any like monetary payback in the
Yeah,
future of it for me. But I came back to
yeah,
this podcast because I realized like, oh, this is the only real way I had to hang out and chat with my friends regularly. And goddamn, do I miss doing that on a regular
That
basis.
was one of the things where I was really struggling with those last few years of Power Reviews because so much of it at that point were just focusing on the effects and the editing. And it was very isolating working on a lot of that work. I wasn't doing a lot of filming with other people for a lot of that stuff. And it's a very different experience to doing something like theater where okay, there's a director, there's a stage manager, there's a producer, there's all these different roles, and you're just one of those roles. You might be in a leadership role, you might be in a support, but there's all sorts of other people doing all sorts of other roles. And for Power Review, I was just pretty much the entire production team for most of the show. You helped out a bit with editing for a stretch.
Mhm.
My other friend Azzy helped out with editing for a stretch, but so much of it, the writing, the effects, most of the editing, a lot of the acting, the stunt choreography, figuring out any props that need to be created. All of that was me, and it
Mhm. I still remember I when I went up to visit you a couple years ago, the few times we left the apartment, both times I think it
yeah
was we were going for something else ostensibly, but you both times were like, I need to make sure I go to the crafts aisle or the home improvement aisle to look at stuff to
yeah
get some ideas for what I could do to make this prop I
I'm
want
just
to make.
always in that mode. And now I've got a bunch of other projects I'm doing that instead of this one singular project that's all consuming. Like right now, I'm like down like our furnished basement, and I'm staring at two different projects, or no, three projects are currently in front of me in terms of stuff for the house, along with just like some wood glue and other tools just hanging out over there. Like, I'm looking at, "Oh, yeah, that's the fireplace guard I need to finish for the kids' playroom. Oh, there's the pool gate that I need to finish making a new version of so it's not sagging anymore. Oh, there's that shelving I'm gonna put up so I can finally unload these boxes." And it's all stuff I've been working on over the summer that's just like there's always stuff going on, always things I gotta be and now it's just a million little things instead of the one big thing of power. Um, I'm not gonna lie, it's nice to have that variety. I wish there was less stuff to do overall. I would, but that is kind of my lot in life. It seems.
Yeah,
It's
it is. It is definitely odd to have those skills of I spent a good amount of time during my last year of YouTube, like running around uh town and like working very long hours on my computer, making sure video I got a video out every week because that was my entire last week. I did this whole or my entire last year on YouTube as the Vacuuminator. I did this thing where I was doing a video every week to see if I could possibly push the algorithm towards I don't even remember what it was now, but like getting
yeah,
myself past a certain milestone to prove that there was still potential for growth. And a lot of those skills that I developed in that time have now transferred into real life things where like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I do DoorDash as a side gig now. I I
yeah,
was not a very proficient driver before that last year on YouTube, and I had to become one, and I had to get used to at a moment's notice going from one end of town to another to film a thing. And that skill translated very well to grabbing food on one end of town and running it to another. Or even just this weekend, Thursday morning, my mom messaged me, I'm going to be out of town for 2 days this weekend. Could you go check on my dog a couple of times? And like the me of
yeah,
just 4 years ago probably would have like had a huge stress spiral at that because like oh that's a 10-minute drive across town and then I got to be in a different place than I'm used to for a few hours and da, 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 and I only kind of know that dog, so it's gonna be standoffish with me for the first few minutes. But now I'm just like, oh yeah, that's no problem. I'll just go there right after I get off work. I'll walk it. I'll have dinner there, and then I'll walk it again, and it'll be fine. It'll be okay.
yeah. I'll admit, I don't like driving, but I am doing a lot. I have ramped up my driving this year, just in terms of you know that's what I can contribute with food not bombs most of the time. I can do transportation.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
certainly is an acquired taste.
and transferable skills are are a very real thing that a lot of times I think like so much of the stuff that you like learn in high school, a lot of people just kind of let fall out of their brains, but if you look at it in the right context, a lot of it is actually useful, just not necessarily in the ways you think they are. Like, I'm a physics teacher. Most people don't really use physics per se in their day-to-day lives, but what I emphasize pretty much every day is I basically say at the beginning of this, I'm going to spend the next 10 units of this course teaching you unit 1 over and over again. And unit 1 is the problem solving method, where it's like you need to identify you when you look at a problem, you identify what it is the problem is asking you. You identify what it is that you've been given to work with. You identify what formula will connect them, and then you can plug things in and you can manipulate and you can solve the formula from there. But you need those first steps, and that is absolutely transferable. You have any problem, you need to think about, okay, what is it I am trying to do? What is it I have to work with? What connections exist between the things that I have and the thing that I want? And then I can work with it from there. And that mindset, more than anything else, is what I learned as a physics. And I think that that is what I strive to teach my students as a physics teacher now. You know, they're gonna run. You run into some cool stuff like, okay, this is how projectile motion works. This is how electromagnetic radiation. Blah, blah, blah. But really, I want you to be able to solve problems, whether they're solving problems for me or solving problems in your life. I want you to know how. I want you to have that skill of problem solving. I am in the business of skill development here, and that is a skill I want you to have. And when you look at your other subjects, you look at English, that is developing your communication skill. Don't need to be writing essays, about Oliver Twist when you're an adult, but you need to be able to communicate effectively, and you need to be able to understand what the people around you are trying to communicate and what your media landscape is communicating and the impact that will have on you. History, you don't need to know about the Battle of 1812, but you need to be able to learn how to put your modern world into a context. And context, as I've emphasized a lot in power reviews, is important. Like, absolutely.
Yeah. And that is something that can really slap you in the face sometimes. Like, I have you ever heard of a podcast called Behind the Bastards?
Yeah, it's done by at least one of the same people behind some more news, if I recall correctly. I haven't
I think you're
I think Cody Johnson is on there.
you if he is, he's not on it regularly. I haven't heard him on an episode yet, but I started listening to it recently. Um, and like this is just something that's been rattling around in my head this week, so you've given me
Yeah.
an opportunity to talk about it. But just the other day, I was listening to they did a two-part episode on like how cigarettes kind of invented a lot of things we just take for granted as a part of modern
Yeah.
life, like a lot of the ways business works and a lot of marketing techniques. And like the overarching stuff was interesting. Like you can potentially make the case that like without cigarettes, you don't get toy collecting as a hobby, which was fascinating to
Huh.
learn. But for me, I got hit much more personally when I found out that like one of the first really successful cigarette executives left all of his money when he died to North and South Carolina so that they could make a proper electrical grid. And that is why my state's electrical company that I pay every month is called Duke Energy because the guy's name was Buck Duke.
Okay. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Like that, but that goes back to
yeah.
context, history, everything is intertwined more
And
than
I
you think
feel
it
like,
is.
that's something that it's really difficult for teachers to effectively convey. And many of them aren't even necessarily aware of it on a on a conscious level. They can just be really passionate about their topic and want to share the topic, but not necessarily uh, ideas of how their topic is transferable and how to communicate that to their student. Um, and part of that is the context in which we all live our lives. You know how the things that you studied are going to be of value to you in your career and the careers that you've had in the past, but you might not be sure of how it could be more broadly transferable. And usually it just ends up being, well, you need to know this for
Mhm.
the next grade or college, or if you go into this career or if you go into that career, as opposed to no, this is going to be regardless, and that can be very difficult to effectively convey. Because I feel like that seems like stuff that I sort of picked up along the way, rather than something that I feel like my teacher effectively instilled within me, that sense of how these skills are transferable. Yeah,
It's definitely something
yeah,
that I think you pick up over time and through your own interests. Like my I've always had an interest in history, but I've never really had like the supreme appreciation for it and
yeah,
for how everything is intertwined until I'd say the last 5 or 6 years. Because like back when it was still mostly documentaries and it wasn't the Hitler and Pawn Stars channel, I would watch the History Channel quite a bit as a kid. But like all those documentaries were so general that like I knew I found them interesting, but I couldn't say why. Now as an adult, like I can point to specific things and I can say like, look, this happened and that connects to this thing now, and that's crazy. Like that thing I just said about cigarettes, or the much more general thing that like, hey, if you want to get modern kids interested in like say World War II, all you got to do is tell them like, hey, you don't get anime if we don't drop the bomb on Japan.
fair enough.
It's very crude. It's very crude, but it's a very simple and
Yeah,
effective way to like
and
get their
like I,
attention.
you know, history is probably the topic I was interested in back in that, and economics. Economics. The teacher once congratulated me on staying. I still did well with all my classes. I think with what you know about me, it's not surprising that I was academically inclined, academically skilled. So I did well with all my classes when I was growing up. Yeah.
I mean, you are a math teacher for crying out loud.
And I'm even I'm a math teacher who, even though I'm not teaching math now, in my current job I'm purely physics. I'm a math teacher who picks up on things
Mm.
in math that other math teachers sometimes struggle with. Like it's really surprising to me how many math teachers don't feel comfortable teaching like pre-calc and calculus. And I haven't taught those topics specifically, but I can communicate about them pretty effectively. And if I was in the position to have to do so, I'd be fine with doing that. You want? I think I may have mentioned before how I've got a lot of soapboxes I can get myself up on top of. I've got a whole soapbox about the way that calculus is taught in this country. Um, I've got strong opinions on the way calculus. I dug into it. Yeah, I dug into it with a
All
student.
the more reason for
Um,
you to get involved with that teachers union.
yeah, the structure of it. I'll give you the quick analogy that I always use. The way that it's taught is like, okay, so I'm going to teach you how to make a chair, right? Here's how I'm going to teach you how to make a chair. I'm going to show you every different version of a chair leg. I'm going to show you every different version of a chair arm. I'm going to show you every different version of a chair seat. But I'm not actually going to tell you what a chair looks like. That's the way calculus is taught. They get into all of the granular aspects of calculus without
Mm.
actually giving an effective communication of the overview of what calculus actually is. And that makes it deeply opaque to the point where the whole point of taking calculus at this stage is basically to show that you are smart enough to do it, because they make it deliberately confusing. When really, like, I don't know what you may or may not remember from high school math.
I mean, the thing you have to remember, Jacob, is that like I also had a very weird schooling experience. I was
Right? You were home.
I was homeschooled with massive air quotes until I was 14, and then I entered into what was supposed to be a GED program for adults, and I went to a
Yep.
couple of classes, but I mostly just did online modules until I got a GED at the age of 17.
Right. So I'll ask you this because this is one of the things that most people remember from algebra if they don't remember. You remember what the equation is for a straight line?
Not in the slightest.
I'll say it, and it might sound familiar. Y equals mx plus b. Yeah, every time that,
I
and this is something where okay, you're an adult, you haven't been in school in a while, but for teenagers, like that's like the one thing they'll remember from algebra one was
mm,
I will ask a random question about okay, what formula are we using? Y equals mx plus b. Not even remotely related, but I appreciate that you remember that. And and just calculus is about m. In the equation y equals mx plus b, calculus is about m, pretty much. Like half of calculus is about m. Get right down.
you say that, and I'm surprised that like for all the science fiction humanity has made, the only like substantial fictional character named M I can think of is from James
Fair enough.
Bond.
But yeah, it's basically you find the slope of a line. That's what calculus is about. It's the study of rates of change. And if you have a straight line, the rate of change for a straight line is very easy to find. It's just the rise over the divide by the rise. But for functions that are more curved, you would need to find an equation that can determine what the slope is at any given point, and that's called a derivative. Half of calculus is calculating derivatives. The other half of calculus is calculating intervals, which is basically finding the original equation back from the derivative. And that's about it. That's what calculus is. And
Hmm.
so I'll just like put an equation of a line up on a board and say, what's the slope of that line? They'll be like 3. I'm like, okay, congratulations, you just took a derivative. That you just did calculus. They're like, what? What do you mean I just did calculus? I would do that with my like sophomore math students as like the last unit of the intermediate algebra classes. I would just do like 2 days on calculus, and they were doing derivatives by the end. It's their thing, and this kind of ties back to arguably the theme of our entire conversation, which has been that so many things are so much more approachable than you think. They are just deliberately framed as opaque to create barriers for it. But they are so much more approachable than you think once you're able to place them into the proper. Which was also, a major theme of power reviews. That was actually something so circling back to that for a quick moment. That was actually something that I tried to do in some early episodes and then didn't keep up with. That I tried to still make land in the end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but the fact that you didn't string them so hard through, I think gives them more power when you bring them back in the
the
finale.
penultimate
Like
episode.
when you cut that clip of you saying decontextualization in is it the final or the penultimate episode? Yeah. When that happens, it's a little like, oh shit, he has been thinking about it he has had a plan from the start. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. That was, and I'll admit, context was a major theme that I realized early on, like before I came out with Year Zero, was going to be part of the show. Um, and it wasn't until I think the end of Year Zero that I realized exactly how it was going to ultimately. But I realized it by the end of Year Zero. That moment of context, that was something I had in mind basically from the end of Year Zero. Or it might have been at the end of Year One. I forget if it was the end of Year Zero or the end. I think it was the end of Year Zero. Had fleshed out in my mind where things would go after. Because I knew before I started the series, what I wanted to do for Year One. I wanted it to end with the reveal of the Phantom Ranger going off into this interdimensional phenomenon to save the day. And I knew that was what I want, where I wanted it to get to by the end, and then that was what I had in mind starting. And then by the
Which still, I think it does bear mentioning because people may not realize it. People who have joined the fandom since or who are younger and are into Power Rangers and are more online now.
Yeah.
When that episode dropped, that was like a fandom shaking event. I think that was the most popular the show ever
Yeah.
was right after
Yeah.
that reveal.
Especially since, like, the Phantom Ranger was not a presence in any aspect of the franchise since Power Rangers in Space, since Countdown to Destruction. That was the last time the Phantom Ranger had appeared.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But he was always something that people had wondered about and theorized about, and you brought that to the forefront. Like you repopularizing theorizing about who the Phantom Ranger was, I think it has as much a stamp on the franchise as Linkara making a joke that
I
gets pink energy being dangerous back
I can
into the show.
I can't take credit for that level of impact. I'm not gonna. I know I reach never on par with Linkara by any stretch. Like maybe in some very niche circles. But I do find it funny that the Phantom Ranger did come so much to the
I,
forefront in comics. Not long.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And I mean, it's fair for you to say you don't think it is that big because again, you're not a very narcissistic person. But I don't think those comics don't happen if you don't make a bunch of people turn their head and go like, "Oh wait, the Phantom Ranger."
Maybe. I think that, like, let's be honest. We'll be honest here. I don't think that Kyle Higgins was watching Power, and the first, and then
Oh no.
return.
But that's the thing is you don't have to have those creatives watching that thing
Maybe
directly for that
I think it
influence to
was
get
that
back to them.
he was an old school fan. He decided to put in the Phantom Ranger as a little, as a little nod, in his first, year run when he introduced Draken's World, and there was the reaction to that, and that led to more. That's I think that
Hmm.
Kyle Higgins probably can take the credit for fandom being reintroduced in that way. Even if the further fleshing out was done by other writers later. But like Phantom was one of the first Rangers outside of the core Mighty Morphin team that was presented within the comics, even if it was in a brief cameo. And and that and I think that was more a function of somebody who grew up with the show being in a position of creative that allowed for that to then happen. Much like I grew up, so
Hmm.
I think that was more kind of parallel creatives rather than me actually having that impact on the franchise. I could be wrong. It would be really cool to discover I was. I will. Won't lie that I absolutely believe that I may have had an influence on Beast Morphers, but I don't think I can actually claim credit for the return of the Phantom in the franchise. As much as I find it supremely ironic that the comics established
Hmm.
the Dark Spectre as being functionally the Phantom's nemesis, that was amazing. Because like I didn't have the reveal that Dark
Yeah.
Spectre was the Phantom's nemesis in Power Reviews until after that happened in the comics, and that was bonkers to me. That they, yeah,
Yeah, and that whole issue is just wonderful too, because it's basically what if the Phantom Ranger was season one Mandalorian, and it's a really fun little story.
and it messed with me a little bit to realize that they were Phantom being such an ancient entity, being arguably the first Ranger. That was very unexpected from the comics because that was not my interpretation of the character at that point. And I think really makes his relationship with Cassie rather dodgy.
Yeah.
Um, I was not a big fan of that choice,
It's one
which
of
is
those
one of the
things
reasons.
where I think a writer comes up with a concept and doesn't fully
Yeah,
think through the implications first, or maybe isn't even aware of a certain aspect of the character. Because the romance between Cassie and the Phantom is there, but it's a very subtle thing, and it's only in a couple episodes. So I think it's probably easy for some folks who don't pay super close attention to the show to miss.
yeah. Like I don't know. I think also just people people don't really appreciate how like negative the negative impacts of the power imbalances inherent in age gap relationships are,
Yeah.
and may not like feel like it's that big a deal. Like, Twilight was a huge major franchise, and that was about a teenage girl dealing with a centuries old dude in a relationship. And that's again that's kind of dodgy, but
Hmm.
somehow, you had millions of people behind it. So, maybe
It's also a show that's very, or not a show. It's a property that's very inherently focused on communicating the value of you should find your one true love, marry him, and have a child as soon as possible to young girls, which is not exactly the best thing to be doing.
it's so I was not a huge fan of that particular choice in the context of the relationship with Cassie. I think that one of the things that I tried to accomplish with my version of the character was the idea of him having not had a body and then later having received a body, and that sort of leading to those initial connections of he may be a century old entity, but he is now in a new form that is a very young form and working through those emotions. And I think that also, as far as the character and power reviews, due to the
Mhm.
amnesia element, that kind of reset him in many respects in terms of emotional maturity that put him on a bit more of a level playing field with, ordinary people. And so yeah, it was me as always just make
Yeah.
my own adjustments to the canon to better align things with my interpretation of how that universe operates and how these characters should be engaging with each other. It was definitely a little bit of a nail biting stretch there where I'm just like, I gotta read Edge of Darkness. What's gonna be in there? How is it gonna mess with my continuity? Please don't destroy my continuity.
Yeah, that's definitely a risk you got to run when you're making a fan film. Though I think that was probably very unintentional at first because again, the Phantom Ranger was such an obscure character for so long.
I thought I was so safe. Nobody had done anything with him in like 20 years. Well, not 20 years, but like close to it.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, I think it was like almost a 20-year gap. Actually, come to think of it, between like I'm trying to think when I think it was 18 years. I think it was an 18-year gap between his last appearance in in Countdown to Destruction and his first appearance in the comics in 2016. Because he first appeared in that first Draken backstory issue, which I want to say was maybe around maybe issue 10-ish, something like that. Somewhere between, I want to say, maybe issues 8 and 12. I'm having trouble remembering the exact issue at this particular. Because I remember they did like 4 issue arcs in those early um in those early story arcs where you'd have like 3 things going on in the current arc, and then there'd be like a flashback issue focusing on the character, and then 3 more, and then flashback issue, flashback. How they structure, which I liked
Hmm.
that structure. I thought that was, but yeah, it's wild that I got to play that character and
Mhm. It's crazy. Like in a way, the Phantom is more your character than it is a Power Rangers character at this point, though you have no real ownership of it.
right, exactly. And same thing with and I don't. There's, I feel almost like to a certain extent MJ and Olivia Tennant kind of share the Dr. K character, because Dr. K was a much more fleshed out character
Mhm.
in from RPM.
Dr. K is arguably the main character of RPM.
Yeah, and then we had her as a character for 100 episodes in our show as well,
Mhm.
and kind of filled the gap between Doctor K in RPM and Doctor K in Beastmore.
Yeah.
I and that was another thing where
That's another thing where it's like, "Oh, never thought we'd see that character
yeah,
again," and then
exactly.
all of a sudden
And I even gave a little nod to Beast Morphers in that final episode, where like she said something like, perhaps I'll rethink my own wardrobe. I like your ensemble, the Mayo, to reflect what
Mhm.
her new outfit in when she appeared to be.
Yeah. Well, and also the just getting back to that universe and having a Beast Morphers
Yeah.
like team there ready to go.
And I do have that connection with grid defense as existing functionally parallel to Beast Morphers, which is kind of fun. Since Beast Morphers happens in 2019, and so did Grid Defense, and Grid Defense is a Power Ranger, is a Doctor K, related team. And then I had a number of little nods to all the series that took place in the years since I had intended to finish Power. I didn't. I got to have the little nod to. Although it does seem to be a universe where dinosaurs never went extinct, but I don't think that one's our fault.
Yeah.
And
It's a much more clear and much more funny one.
yeah, and then we appear to there appear to still be other side effects of the you know the splitting of realities, in that physics is a little bit more malleable now. So some people may be experiencing life similarly to a cartoon, to functionally
Mhm.
explain Victor and Monty and Ben and Betty.
Yeah.
And those were just the little nods I felt like I could. I don't think I ended up working in any references explicitly to Dino Fury or Cosmic Fury. Um, just because those, I was already so far into the production process when those two came out.
Well, you can always say like the Power Reviews ends
Yeah.
right as Dino Fury is beginning, especially because Cosmic Fury ends with such a sort of
Yeah.
bittersweet refrain for Zordon in kind
Yeah,
of a similar
it's true.
place to where you end up leaving
And
him.
also just time is wacky with with Power Reviews.
Mhm.
Like I explicitly had it end in October of 2016. Um, like even though it didn't actually finish until October of 2024, in universe it ends in October of 2016. So that gives the characters also those 3 to grow and for all these other events to take place that would be influenced by the events of Power. The more cartoonish side uh, comedy side characters, those didn't hit until uh, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. You know, uh, the the dinosaur universe in Dino Charge that happened in 2016. It kind of positions it in an interesting spot that I kind of committed to because I wanted to make sure that Dr. K would be back where she's supposed to be in time, and I didn't want to have the characters just be in the void, for a decade, and that seemed unreasonable character wise. And it's still just very funny how that ended up stretching out, just so much in the end. But I feel like it it ultimately all held up. I think everything I felt ultimately fit really well. There's all these little errors that I had in my videos because I was always rushing. My QA was not super to par in terms of there's like this weird little glitch here, this weird little glitch in the editing. Some scenes don't look as good as they could. Some audio portions don't sound as good as they could. Um, but it was always an experiment in storytelling. And I felt like that I got to effectively explore. And I feel like that was ultimately was there for. Outside of just people wanting to hear my opinions on that, which did seem to be a significant portion of people sticking around, since that's always so many of the questions were ultimately about like your thoughts on this, when you're
Mhm.
going to cover this episode, things like that. Whereas my yeah, whereas my big focus um was really on using the episodes to tell the story.
What's the next episode going to be a review of? Mhm. And that was always the thing that I appreciated the most about the show, just on an episode to episode basis, was how well, by the time you were halfway through it, or even maybe a little bit earlier than that, how well you were always able to intertwine the story with the actual review, always able to find a in narrative reason for doing a review and making that thematically work with the story you were trying to tell in that episode, other than just, no shade on certain reviewers we like who do this, but like a lot of reviewers will just go like, no, well, we're just going to do a review now because that's the format. That's what you do, and the story goes around it. You always try to integrate it and make them one and the same.
And yeah, I know like other creators have done the story side of things and just they've gone different ways with it. But I'm really happy that we managed to do something that I truly feel is unique as a final product. Um, and that was something that really was kind of settling in during a lot of those later episodes. I remember filming for episode uh, 90. It was 94. The second Power Morphicon episode when I shot that one bit for the conclusion where it was databases at the convention hall talking all these fans analyzing the episode Lost and Found in Translation. That was something I filmed in a small lecture hall in my old college, and this episode came out in what 2022, something like that, maybe 2021, 2022. This
Hmm.
at this point, over a dozen years since I'd graduated that college, and kind of going in there and cracking out the camera and kind of claiming this little room for my little project and filming that all on my own with nobody else there. Just thinking, it got me just thinking to myself and reflecting, like nobody's doing this. This is not something that other people in the world do. I am quite literally the only person doing this exact thing that I'm doing right now. And if I was not doing it, it wouldn't exist.
But that very fact is why you have to do it.
Yeah. And there's something very empowering about that, recognizing that you are engaging in a unique endeavor. It creates a sense of sort of place in the world to a certain degree. That even in a world of over 8 billion people, an individual still has unique value. Um, and I was applying that to what I was doing while also thinking of that in more generalized terms. In a world of 8 billion people, of over 8 billion, an individual still has, is amazing. Everyone's living very specific lives. There may be general trends. Some people might deviate from those trends more than others. And I was having that experience of I'm doing something no one else is using their old college campus to film a 100 part meta narrative on the subject of Power Rangers. That is not something that anyone else on this planet is doing or has ever done or will likely do again. And that's fascinating and it's empowering because it means that when you get involved in the world around you, there's a chance you can make a difference that no one else can because you are a unique person.
It's it's funny. It reminds me of
Yeah.
as cliche of it is to say this on the internet now, but it reminds me of an episode of Star Trek. Um, there's a the second episode or the second season TNG episode, The Measure of a Man, where Data is explaining to this android that works for or is a member of Starfleet, and he's facing a legal case to
Yeah.
basically have his personhood stripped away and be disassembled so they can figure out how to make more of him. And he's arguing against it to this guy. And I forget the exact quote, but he says something like, if you were to mess this up and you weren't able to put me back together the same as I was before, then something of the very substance, the very texture, the very flavor of the universe would be lost, and that would be a tragedy. And it's people need to realize like that's not just like cool, interesting things like, oh, an android that exists in a science fiction series. Like, that's you. that in that moment, the person who wrote that episode is talking about themselves and they're talking about you. You are a person who can have an effect on their world, similar to how Commander Data did, or how Jake did, or how I did, or how whoever you want to say
It's
did.
true. And that's a classic episode. Like, I'm not even really a Trekkie guy, and I know that episode. Um, I don't know if I've watched it in its entirety, but I remember watching at the very least portions of it in a course I took in college. That was about cognitive science. I think I mentioned in my live stream last night, Minds and Machines, where half of it was building Lego robots and half of it was talking about philosophy. I think that one came up, and there was also like a Voyager episode where Tuvix, like Tuvok and Neelix, merged into a new being, and discussion of that person's person as an, and just getting into the nature of what personhood even is a big of those episodes. But yeah, no, that framing of it,
Yeah.
every person matters, and some people are going to have larger individual impacts than others, but every person does have, and you don't really know what yours is going to be, unless you make that effort for that impact. One of the things about being a YouTuber is the mysterious ways of the algorithm. You never know who's going to go viral and become the next big thing, and you can't really rely upon that system to place you into that position. You just kind of put yourself out there. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. You just got to put yourself out there and see what happens. It's the same thing with anything else. I think it's what all of us need to really be trying to do right
Mhm.
now, in a positive sense, in a real sense, outside of that like world of YouTube, in the real physical world where we engage with these systems that control our lives. And yeah, maybe the way you influence that is through a YouTube channel. I'm trying to do that a little bit with Let's Be Superheroes. Right now, we don't have a big subscribership. We don't have big viewerships. Some of the stuff that we've released is still in double digits, including, I believe, my most recent video. Um, However proud of it I may be. I think it's got probably less than 50, and we only have just over 50 subscribers overall. But I'm still trying to put things that have value. And even if I only influence a few people, who knows what those people are. Like when I do like phone banking or any other sort of volunteer work, I'm working under a certain theory of the
Yeah.
universe, but in a kind of philosophical. The way I see it, if we, there's that, idea of multiverse theory, and everything's branching off and branching off and branching off, and you are kind of proceeding down these different branches, and you're not entirely sure what path you're on. But I feel like when you make efforts towards a specific path, you are increasing the likelihood that you're on that path. You are improving the probability of that you're on that path. And if you speak up on something or you take action on something, then I feel like that means that you've chosen a universe where you are more likely to do the things that you just, and you are in a universe now where people more generally are more likely to do what you have chosen a universe, and it's a universe that has an increased probability of other people taking the same action that you are, because if it's possible for you to take that action, that's also possible for somebody else to take that action as well. And if you're doing it, there's a good chance somebody else is doing it too. If you are not doing it, there's a good chance somebody else is not doing it too. And that's kind of one of the things I use to carry me through when I'm trying to motivate myself to still push towards a better world. When there's so many other people out there, like what difference can I make? I'm a tiny little bean. But if I'm doing it, somebody else, and I might be modeling, or I might just be, operating on a probability wave that happens to feature more people taking action. And I chose that timeline where I'm taking action, and therefore I'm on a timeline where more people are taking action. I'm just one of them.
100%.
That's a different kind of actual.
Totally agree.
Um,
Um,
I don't know how much I literally believe that, but it's something that I think has some truth to
yeah. I mean, it's that thing of like, I don't think anybody except for like the most fanatical religious people really 100% believe whatever belief system they have. They pick the one that sounds best and they go through life hoping that it's right because it makes them feel good to think about it.
I think I once like read an article on some theory that a physicist had put forward, and I was amused that it was something that I had also thought of, um, just in different terms, that I nicknamed quantum immortality.
Hmm.
Um, and that idea, it's sort of an alternative to an afterlife, and it's a little trippy. But the idea that you are most likely to perceive the universe in which you continue to exist. Like, let's face it, if there are two paths, one where you continue to exist and one where you don't, your perception is likely to continue a path where you continue to exist. And ostensibly, however small the probability might be, that path could go on forever. You would just be existing in an increasingly unlikely universe. So, if in that
Hmm.
particular iteration of multiverse theory, we're functionally all immortal, but we only exist in these different versions of the universe that are just increasingly and increasingly and increasingly unlikely and increasingly strange. So, in that interpretation, life doesn't ever really necessarily end. It just keeps
I don't know if I necessarily believe in that as like a real thing, but I like that as like the germ of an idea to like kickstart a good sci-fi book. I feel like you could write a really good story about that.
it's fun. Every like there's the whole thing of how, oh, nobody, one constant is that everybody dies. But what if the one constant was that everyone lives, but everyone lives in a different reality? And I think that's a fun little flip on that. That it, again, nobody really knows how any of these things go. It's just kind of a fun thought experiment.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I have no idea if when you invited me on to commemorate, 1 year since the conclusion of my comedic action Power Rangers web series, that that we'd end up spending a decent chunk of it discussing philosophy. But
I
there,
mean, it wasn't in the roadmap certainly, but it's a pit stop I'm always happy to make, especially with you because you always pull out like you just did. You always pull out something that I've never considered before. And makes me go, oh, there's something to that. Um, so I appreciate hearing that, and we are getting a little long in the tooth here, but
yeah,
there's a couple media related topics I did want to get into while I had you. Um, so I think we'll do those, maybe go another 30, maybe another 45 minutes max, and then we'll close out. Um, but first, I do want to ask, what is Power Rangers episode 555?
Power Rangers episode 555. So let's see, that would be 555, 55 minutes. So let's see. I know that's right in the middle of SPD 555. Um,
Yeah, you're
I
warm.
remember is that the messenger too? That
You're very warm.
I've got to think about that for a little moment longer. Let's see here. Um, 17, 16, 7 messenger. Be the oh wait, no 30, 55 minutes. So wait, that would be, is that messenger part one?
It is.
I
You said part two, and for a second I was like, "Oh shit!"
yeah, I'm just like, wait a minute, because I misplaced my number for a moment. I was thinking of the 22nd episode instead of the 21st. Yeah, no, that would be messenger.
Okay. Now for a bonus point that totally doesn't
Yeah,
exist, can you tell me who wrote and directed that
who wrote and
episode?
directed that episode? Messenger part one. Um,
Yeah.
I I don't have those memorized. I know that Charlie had stuff with that with.
Okay. It's right next to the episode number where I'm
I
looking
know
at the information. It was written by Bruce Kalish and directed by
Grinder. Okay,
Paul Grinder.
I was just like tossing Charlie Haskell out there for a moment because I know he directed a lot of stuff. Um, in during. But no,
He's
I
a good
yes,
guest.
Paul Grinder.
Law of
Um,
averages and all that.
it being a Bruce Kalish episode, that was like that tracks. Like I was, it could have been him, it could have been Jackie, it could have
Yeah.
been John Teligent. because those were the real chief writers during that time. But I hadn't memorized those. Now, maybe if you asked me for anything from like space through Time Force, I could just flip a coin on if it's going to be just Martin with the occasional Mark Litton episode
Yeah,
in
that's
there.
real easy.
Although I believe he was going under a different name.
Mhm.
Um, but he was
That's also the era where like Koichi Sakamoto directs every other episode.
mm, he did good stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
so there we go. I still kind of got it. Again, not as good as I used to be, but once I adjusted my math a little bit, I'm like, oh no, wait, yeah,
Yeah.
that is Messenger part one. Because yeah, Zapped would have been the 23rd episode, and I was trying to think of the
All right.
21st.
Okay, so I
Not
gotta ask because it's become
so.
a recurring thing for us for I don't know how long now. Have you bothered to check out any of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies yet?
I still haven't.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's not, but at this point, it's not due to any active ill will. I was, it took a while for me to calm down over losing the Andrew Garfield franchise, but the fact that he did end up returning for No Way Home, softened that significantly for me, and I do want to eventually check that out. I just haven't sat down to watch the movie. I finally caught up on Across the Spider Verse, but I've not yet checked out the Tom Holland Spider Man movies. I'm very behind on the MCU right now. I managed to keep up.
What was the last
What was that?
MCU thing you checked out? What was the last
Well, I managed
MCU
to
thing
stay
you
on top
checked
of it
out?
pretty well through Endgame, and then I've been just been very spotty since then.
Mhm.
Um, we saw Black Widow when it came out because that was like one of the first movies, as after like the COVID vaccine had come out.
Yeah, did that go to theaters? I remember that being directly to Disney Plus.
No, that did go to theaters.
Oh, okay.
See what else? I've seen Multiverse of Madness. I watched that like on TV. We've seen WandaVision, which I enjoyed. 'Cause let's face it, WandaVision is arguably also like the plot of Power Review.
Yeah. It is made directly to appeal to you,
Yes,
both in its themes and like the fact that it's about the history of television. Like it's very much like your kind of thing.
yeah. Somebody dealing with emotional trauma by retreating into their favorite television shows. Yeah, basically, yeah.
Which, by the way, I don't know if anybody's told you about it, but they are working on a sequel show to that's focused on
Right.
Vision called Vision Quest.
Focused on the White Vision. Right. Um,
We just got a bunch of details about that at NYCC that like uh I think it's supposed to come out late
yeah,
next year, and they've got the plot and most of the scripts nailed down right now, and it's going to feature like basically every robot from the
that's fun.
MCU coming back in a human
Oh,
body.
interesting. That should be
To the point where like they actually got James Spader to agree to come back as Ultron.
okay. So I've seen the first season of What If. Um, we MJ and I have seen Loki season 1 and 2. Um,
That's another thing that's very up your alley.
yeah, it's good stuff. I feel like there's other things I'm forgetting. We only saw like the first 2 episodes of Miss Marvel, and then we never ended up following up
Mm.
on it. Not that it was bad or anything. We just lost
The
track
first
on it. But
episode is
um,
incredible, and then the rest of it is just kind of in my opinion.
it was cute. It was cute. I feel like there's other MCU stuff that I've seen that I'm just forgetting about right
Mhm.
now. Must have watched something else. I'm just blanking on what it is.
I mean, this isn't necessarily MCU, but I feel I should ask: did you get the chance to check out X-Men '97?
Yes, we did watch X-Men '97. That was cool.
Hell
Um,
yeah, brother!
I grew up on the original X-Men. MJ less so it was interesting, like watching it and being like, oh, this, that, and the other thing. But MJ didn't have that same background. It's like the original X-Men series was just so remarkable.
Mhm. See, I've never been able to get into that show, but I love the Fox X-Men movies, and I was very into current X-Men comics right before that show came out. So I watched it, and I felt like, oh, finally I'm able to see what people saw in the old
Well,
show.
that the first season of the original X-Men animated series is like it opens on what is functionally a race riot, and that is
Mm.
incredibly bold for children's television. And those first 13 episodes are largely serialized, which is also incredibly bold for that era of children's television. Um, they poured so much into that first season, especially that I'm still just very impressed by. Just having having them lose a member in the first in that 2-part premiere, Beast going through the justice system, all of that, just such mature storytelling for a kid's Saturday morning cartoon. Um, that came out in 1992. Just so far ahead of its time on its storytelling I'm still kind of amazed that they ended up doing that.
Okay.
And it's hard to think of children centric television doing something quite like that in the modern, with something that's so clearly focused around allegories to the civil rights era and issues of politics and adult romantic entanglements and things. Not to say that there isn't excellent children's, like modern children's television that also goes through really interesting. Just those specific themes. It feels like the animated X really explored in a way that no other kid show really. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess keeping on with Marvel stuff, um, I name dropped some significant Spider-Man comic book developments during my opening little spiel there. Um, had you heard about any of that beforehand? And how much did some of it throw you for a loop?
I think I'd heard about most of it in some way or another, just like in passing. Um,
Mhm.
I It took me a moment to connect who you were talking about when you said Paul, and I'm like, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
Like, and yeah, I remember her getting the jackpot, and I'd seen like the comic cover of her being Venom, which is also weird. It feels like they're doing so many weird things with her character. Um,
It feels like they're trying to do everything with Mary Jane except literally just
yeah,
what people
but
want.
it does seem like that new Ultimate Universe series is, and
It is, but it's
I'd seen like,
also about to end.
oh yeah,
Like they started it with a
okay,
clear endpoint in mind, or at least that's what we were told. And literally, as recently as today, it came out in an interview with the guy who's writing that series that like I kind of wanted. He said something like, "I kind of wanted to keep it going." But Marvel was like, no, you set up an endpoint. We have to go ahead and end it when you said we would. And he kind of postulated something like, might be because it got too popular. It might be because I was doing stuff with them with the family that people really just
yeah.
want to be happening in the regular universe, and that made somebody up top mad.
But yeah, it seemed like occasional comics panels posted from that series here and there, but I didn't know exactly what was going on. I'm just like, does everybody have amnesia? Is this an alternate universe? What am I looking at?
What is
Okay, so it's an alternate
Yeah,
universe.
very brief explanation is the maker, Ultimate Reed Richards, created what is marketed as a new Ultimate Universe, but is
Mhm.
actually the 616 universe, but he's gone in and fucked with the timeline a whole bunch. Like he's done a bunch of stuff to make sure certain people who would stop whatever his big plan is, because we don't know yet, who people who would have interfered with his big plan, he's gone through and either stopped them from getting their powers or like manipulated their origin to make them like minions of his.
Yeah, interesting.
Uh, but yeah, the Ultimate Spider-Man book is largely removed from it because it's basically just like Peter becomes Spider-Man later in life because he was stopped from becoming Spider-Man when he would have by the Maker, but then another Ultimate character comes in and gives him the Spider, and then he kind of goes to unravel his own little corner of the conspiracy with various characters that you know, but they're slightly different because they became the characters you know older in life.
Right.
Um, And it is very interesting. I do really like that book. It's the only Spider-Man book I'm currently reading, but I wouldn't say like it's a replacement for the main continuity if you're dissatisfied with it.
Right. I do feel like I question that Peter and MJ would have necessarily ended up together in a world where he was never Spider-Man just due to his personal character development being fundamentally different under those circumstances. Would have necessarily compatible. But I would have to read the comic to really know how they interpret.
Mhm. They never really go into like how those two ended up getting together in this universe. It's just kind of like they are together and they love each other, and you just kind of accept that and go with it because they they have a happy family life that they're trying to keep together in the face of all this conspiracy craziness that Peter's getting himself caught
What
up
about
in.
Uncle Ben? Is Uncle Ben still around in that?
So the big twist conceit in the first issue that we weren't told about until the
Mhm.
issue came out is that Ben is still alive, but May recently
Okay,
died.
interesting choice. Um,
Yeah. And also, not only is Ben still alive, but he works for the Daily Bugle at the start of the series, and him and Jonah are like
oh,
best
interesting.
friends.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah.
So I assume did they lean into what, like Peter's a science teacher like he was in the AMS arc or something else?
No, he's working for the Bugle as like a beat reporter, and that's a big conflict in the first couple issues. Is Ben stumbles upon the conspiracy, and he finds out that like he can't report at it. So, the owners of the Bugle are shutting him and Jonah down, and he says, "Well, fuck you. I'm gonna go make my own newspaper then." And Jonah goes with him, and Pete is like, "What the hell are you guys doing? This is a stable job. Don't you need this?" And and Ben's like, "I was about to retire anyway, and my wife just died. I've got nothing to
Interesting
lose."
reinterpretation of the. What were there any
Mhm.
other things that I missed in terms of your Spider-Man developments? Do one of my commentary on it. I think we ran through it.
Uh, One thing I forgot to mention, but I'm sure you've heard about this somehow. Ben Riley came back, was the main Spider-Man for a little bit, and now is a villain alongside his Mary Jane
Okay,
stand-in from when he was
sure.
Spider-Man
What?
the first time.
That's it.
Yeah. It's one of those things of like I
Yeah.
don't hate it, but it
Okay.
also doesn't strike me as a great idea. But yeah, that's like mainstream Western superhero stuff. Oh, I should ask, did you get a chance to check out James Gunn's Superman yet?
Yes. MJ and I went to go see that in theaters when we
Oh, hell
were on vacation
yeah.
over the summer. It was good vibes. I'm totally here
Yeah.
for kindness is the real punk rock. I am 100% here for that overall concept. I think one of the things that they really captured in that movie with the character of Superman is a lot of times they may explore, you know, how important it is to be kind, how difficult it is to be kind. But I think that movie was the first one to really capture for the character of Superman how annoying it is to be kind, where he's just trying to do the right thing, and it's just like, come on,
Yeah.
guys, and like that is a take on Superman that I hadn't seen before and that I'm here for and that I can connect to. I really like that interpretation of Superman, even if it may not be, the traditional interpretation of the character as, the big blue Boy Scout per se. Um, but yeah, he's still kind of a Boy Scout, just in the come on, guys kind of version of a Boy Scout. Yeah.
He's more of a real person as a Boy Scout in that movie.
He's less of that moral ideal and more of a person trying to live that moral ideal rather than a manifestation of the
Yeah.
ideal itself. And I think that that's just a fundamentally more engaging character. And I think that that was a great way to get into the character. As Alex Borstein pointed out in an interview, I also appreciate that he is apparently the first Jewish Superman, or she dubbed him Juperman. Um,
I hadn't heard that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, because she and Rachel Brosnahan are close because they worked on Ms. Maisel together. So she went to go see the movie, and
Hmm.
so she would poke fun at it. And you remember Alex Borstein as the voice of Queen Machina. So that does it have? So there's that Power Rangers connection there. Um, and
Yeah.
and yeah, there is that certain aspect of his portrayal that you know is it leans into a certain Jewishness in terms of that exasperated kind of vibe. And the fact that he was created by Jewish creators, I think also is there's that certain metatextual aspect of it that for me personally, as a Jewish guy, um, I connect to very well. So it was arguably this may be my favorite interpretation of the character. I've never been, a huge Superman guy, but I like this guy. I like this character, this Superman character of somebody who is very, very powerful, but is still struggling to do the right thing, not in terms of making the decision to do the right thing, but because the people around him make it difficult because they are not in the same position that he and I do really enjoy that. I feel like there were like little details where they probably could have tweaked the pacing here and there, but overall the vibes were very good. I was down for it, especially with that interpretation of the character. Jimmy Olsen, on the other hand, dude, what's your damage, man? You that everything with Jimmy and Eve was really awkward. I had to do it. Yeah.
I've heard that take before, and it's fair. However, it's it's also like I enjoyed it just because like Jimmy being this reluctant ladies man is weirdly the most comic accurate Jimmy Olsen has ever been on screen.
It's true. There is, however, I think one aspect of all of this, of the Jimmy Eve storyline that I think it could have just been a single like bit of exposition that I think really would have helped. If they had explicitly stated at some point that Eve was like a supermodel. If that had been mentioned
Mm.
at any, I think that could have brought everything into a much stronger context. Instead of it just being this weird kind of awkward coincidence that like why is Jimmy's ex Lex Luthor's girlfriend? Like that's just super weird. What is going on here?
I think I think you're supposed to get the vibe that she's like a Instagram OnlyFans influencer girl, but like they the whole reason for the selfies ends up being plot relevant, which is good writing, but it also means like it's hard to define what she does
If you
as
had
a
just
person.
if it had been stated that she was a supermodel, that would have explained everything because
Hmm.
that would explain precisely why she has a level of status that Lex Luthor would enlist her to be his girlfriend, and it explains how she would know Jimmy because he's a photographer. So of course he's always hooking up with supermodels. And actually like drawing
Yeah.
attention to their two professions would have explained so much in terms of like why is this connection here? How did these two people connect? How did those two people connect? Why is he oddly blasé about this? But if you put into context, oh, he photographs supermodels all the time. There you go. That awkwardness addressed. We understand why she's there. We understand how they know each other. We understand why he interacts in that way. And that was just one thing where it just like that tiny tweak would have made that element of the story so much. And I always
Yeah, no, like I said, that's a totally fair criticism. I was just more willing to just go with it in the movie.
but you know me, I'm always looking for okay, what's the little tweak that makes it work for
Yeah. Um, moving away from Western superhero stuff, though, uh, what's the last tokusatsu you watched in full, and how'd you feel about it?
in full. I haven't made it to the end of anything recently. The last one was Geats, which I loved. I loved Kamen Rider
Yeah,
Geats.
Geese was a fantastic show.
I watched a good chunk of Gachard. I watched a what else was I watching? Um, I haven't seen any Gav. Let's see. Oh, I watched King Oger. I started Bun Butcher, but I didn't finish Bun. Because the timing on with both Gotchard and Bunbunger was that I basically left off around the time I finished Power Reviews because I was primarily watching things while editing. Um, and so when I was no longer doing the heavy editing, that was a little bit more on automatic and working on things where I could be watching something while doing it. Um, I was no longer watching things with subtitles. Like specifically now with the new projects I've been working on, um, where it's a bit more documentarian. I'm no longer working off a set script and just being like, okay, this take goes there, this take goes there, this take goes there. And instead, I'm finding things with the edit. So it's very difficult for me to multitask in the same way I used to. So I'm not watching stuff with subtitles while trying to edit it. Also,
Yeah, no, I super feel that.
my computer's just gotten super old and like no streaming sites work on it anymore.
Oh no, I don't feel that. I was thinking the other day though, my computer's about 6 years old now, and they say you're supposed to upgrade your computer every 5 years or so. So
My
that is
desktop
something I'm
is
thinking
older
about
than
in
my
terms of
student.
saving. Sorry, I didn't
My
get that.
desktop is older than my student.
Oh
That
Jesus,
You know when
Jake.
I got that? Remember I mentioned that apartment that I was living in for $650 a month for a
Dude, I am
3
face palming so hard right now. This is Picard level face palming.
That is a 2008 Mac Pro. Bro,
Bro.
that 2008 Mac Pro has survived the entire run of Power Review.
What a fucking champ. Let it
That is a
retire.
that is a near 17-year-old computer now. I should
Jesus.
give that computer a diploma.
G
I'm still using
and sus.
editing. I still gotta get something else at some
You
point. But
should.
the only thing that I can watch it on it now in terms of streaming stuff, basically, all the streaming services require updates that my computer can't do. Like, you need to update Firefox. I'm like, yeah, but Firefox won't update anymore for this operating system. Well, you need to update your operating system. No, I don't have the specs to update my operating system, so I can't watch Netflix.
That's insane. Oh man. But no, I definitely I feel you on the subtitle stuff because like as soon as we stopped doing Twit, I was just like, wow, I don't care enough to keep going with any of these current shows. And I don't think I'm gonna jump into another current show until I do get super grabbed by the marketing or there's an extra reason to do so. So I've just been watching older stuff that I've neglected to go back to at any point. Like I watched Fies and Agito and I think there was an Ultra
I
show.
did
I can't remember now. It's been a while. Uh, and like right now I'm watching Bokenger, but I'm watching that one episode a day on my work days. That's my dinner show. Like I will get off work, I'll go to my apartment, I'll make dinner, and then I'll sit down and watch Bokenger, and then I'll maybe post a funny Bluesky post about it, and then I get up and I go door dashing. Like that's my evening routine right now.
did see Ultraman Blazar as well, and we are currently
Yeah.
watching Kamen Rider Zets, since I wanted to support
Mhm.
the the fact that this was
Yeah.
available legally on YouTube on a regular weekly basis.
Yeah, that's definitely like an extra reason that I was alluding to. I watched the first few episodes of Zets semi live. Like we would finish the podcast and then
Right.
I'd go and put it on. However, now that they're just uploading full single episode VODs, I decided I'm gonna wait on watch those two at a time when the since they're doing the
Right.
two-parter format.
Yeah.
So I'll probably be watching some Zets tomorrow, but
It's one of those things where whenever MJ and I can find half an hour, that's when we watch it.
yeah.
And one thing I do really appreciate about Zets, though, especially in the first episode where they were kind of leaning into the dream thing, I think a little bit more, um, was how they basically took the editing style from Power Rangers and made it intentional. In that,
I hadn't thought about that. That's a
that
really
sense where
good
you
analysis.
punch
Yeah.
somebody and suddenly you're in a warehouse district. That's part of the whole dream aesthetic, and that's hilarious to me when I notice that. Like, he's going through a door and suddenly he's in a different location. He gets punched, suddenly he's in a different location. This is Power Ranger style editing, but it actually has an in-universe reason for it because it's within a dream, and that's just chef's kiss.
That's something you would have thought of for power
It's
reviews. That's
that was
really
my
great.
big buy-in with that first episode of Zets where I'm like, oh man, they're using Power Rangers editing with intention as part of the actual like framing of the story and setting. So I hope to see more fun stuff. I thought that was very fun. The editing style of that first episode did an effective job of conveying that sort of dream logic of movie. And it was more effective than I've seen in other efforts to do so. So I was quite impressed with that first. So yeah, that's the Toku stuff
Right
that
on.
I've been up to at this point. I would love to check out Ghost User. I just haven't been able to make the time for it yet because
Okay.
I gotta hunt for anything that's not legit streaming ecosystem.
Yeah. I watched the first episode of it and like don't let this discourage you, but I just wasn't that impressed. And I went in not liking the suits and thinking the theme song was not my kind of vibe. So
It's mostly just
when the first episode didn't grab me that much, I was just kind of like, okay, I don't think I need to watch this one.
that because it's the 50th anniversary stuff. I want to check out to see how they're managing.
hmm And whenever Buster updates me on that stuff, like every couple weeks, Buster will go, "Oh, they had this actor back, and they had this actor back," and I was like, "Okay, that's neat." I don't think I need to actually go watch that
Yeah.
though.
So that's where I'm at on the Toku front right now, having previously been
Mhm.
much more.
Yeah. All right. Well, one last thing I wanted to. I've been wanting to have this discussion with
Okay.
you for a while, actually. And it just so happens that I realized we could do it tonight. So, one thing that's kind of happened in the last few years with me is I've discovered a real appreciation for fantasy that I never realized was there before. And it kind of started when I read all the original Conan the Barbarian stories and got really into that character for a little bit. But it's expanded out into other genres of fiction and other series. And one kind of funny thing that's come from this is I've been doing Brandon Sanderson in a
Yeah.
very weird order. Like I read Stormlight Archive first. I read all of that first, right up to the most recent book, which was only a couple months old when I read it. And I'm slowly working my way through Mistborn at the moment.
I
Would you care at all to pitch me on the Wheel of Time? Because I know you're a huge fan of Wheel of Time.
okay. Pitch you on the Wheel of Time.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my pitch on the Wheel of Time. If you like the sense of starting from a familiar place of fantasy that branches out to deeply flesh out a world and is constructed in such a way that interweaving plot lines reconnect 14 books down the line for a satisfying conclusion, go for it. So that is my pitch. I will couch that in the fact there are so many branching plot lines does mean that during the middle, when everything is, I would say, most spread out and separated, it does slow. The story pacing does slow down significantly during that time. There are also aspects of it being a work of its time. It started back in the like end of the 80s, early 90s, and that the gender dynamics within the series are a little dated. Um, so Robert Jordan definitely had type that came through in his storytelling, and so it plays with some interesting things with gender for its time that may seem a bit dated now, with the heavy focus on a more matriarchal society, where women are more in charge due to certain circumstances. So there's a lot of strong women characters, and there is clearly a sign that Robert Jordan also had a certain strong thing for strong women that can kind of come through. But those would be my primary criticisms of it is that slower pacing in the middle and some of the gender dynamics being a little dated. Otherwise, just the fact that it's this big continuing story that spans over 14 books, and does have, much like with Power Review, a clear conclusion it was working towards the entire time, with many interlocking plot threads, that just has a remarkable level of scope and detail in its world building. I think really made it worth the read for me and made it one of my favorite book series. Um, Arguably my favorite book series. Like, I remember the way that I discovered it was very backwards. I happened across book 7 in like a Walden's book on clearance, and it was like, it was for like $4. I'm like, oh, okay, this looks kind of interesting. I'll check this out. I read it and had no idea what was happening because this was book 7, and I did not realize that these were not going to be self-contained stories. When you're on a book 7, you kind of figure it's a little bit more of a self-contained story, but no, this was just.
So you got into it kind of the way most people get into current comics.
Yeah. And this was, I read this when I was 12.
Oh wow.
And when I was 13, I was in a used bookstore and I happened across the first book of the series. I'm like, okay, let's see what this was actually about. And I read the first book and I loved the first book. It was just a really good, like, classic fantasy adventure. Um, I really like enjoyed following the characters through their initial introduction to the world. Um, just good, solid, classic kind of adventure. And then I'm like, okay, I'm in for this now. Um, love this first story. I read the next book. Okay, I want to see. I want to now see how it leads up to where I left off, and you get to see these characters grow so much across the course of the series, um, from being simple, um, simple people out on a farm in the middle of nowhere into the major power players of this world, and dealing with all of the stress that comes with that. And if you have an eye for detail, there's just a bunch of things like, oh, this character's here, oh, that character, oh, this character who we met 3 books ago is back, and now they're actually playing this major role and doing this and doing that. Just it's a rich tapestry of characters, and story arcs and world building. And
Would you say it's more about any of those one elements? Like, is it
um,
more a character piece, more a story piece, more a
let's see.
world piece?
Have you've seen Babylon 5, right?
Bits and pieces.
Okay. Well, I feel like in a similar way, it's difficult to say that it's about any of those one things because it's doing so many of those things. Um,
Mhm.
you are seeing this extremely well developed world through the lens of these characters moving through it as part of of a larger story. But like, it's part of the basic premise is there is the rising of the Dark One, who is poised to return to the world, and so we're looking at the end of this of potential end to this age, and so everything is gearing up for that big final confrontation that will usher in the new era of history. And like,
Mhm.
and when you actually do get to that final battle in the final book, like, it is so incredibly satisfying that, like, that chapter is like a novella in and of itself, which is amazing. And you have, like, okay, so this character is now a general, and this character is leading these armies, and that character, and now this character just died, but then this character had this crazy fight, and then this character just invented a whole new type of magic, and this did this, and that's just all like in one single novella length chapter in like the final book, like just crazy stuff. That's all just like the culmination of all these plot threads, like all happening at once.
And you still found that satisfying, even though it's a different writer for the last 2 books.
Yes, because Brandon Sanderson was a tremendous fan of Robert Jordan. He was chosen specifically by Jordan's widow to finish the books. Um, he worked
Mhm.
off Jordan's notes. Like, he really dedicated himself to finishing the series he would have wanted. One of the only things.
Yeah. I've listened to interviews with him since getting into his own stuff, and he talks about that like it was the most terrifying time of his life, but now it's like one of the things he's
Yeah,
most proud
exactly.
of.
Because he got to honor one of his heroes, basically. And
Mhm.
I do think that actually, um, he did a really good job fixing the pacing issues when he took over. So like,
Hmm.
one of the interesting things was that one of the last things Jordan was saying before he passed was, um, okay, I swear I'm gonna finish this book on this story with book 12. I'm gonna finish it on book 12. I don't care how long it needs to be. I don't care if they need to invent new binding methods. I don't care if it needs to come with its own library card. I'm finishing it on book 12. And then Brandon Sanderson comes along after and is like looking over his notes, like, okay, yeah, he wasn't kidding that this thing was gonna be long. And I don't think publishers are gonna let us make it this long. We're gonna need to split it into 3 books to actually finish the story and not rush it. So that's how it ended up becoming a 14-book series. Because he did get a little. One thing that's interesting, and this gives you an idea of some of the issues with the series. My least favorite book was probably book 8, but the book that tends to get the most flack is book 10. Book 10 takes place after a major event in the world of and a huge chunk of it happens over the course of just like this is these keep in mind these are like 700-page books, right? Like half of this book is just characters reacting to the event from the last book. And it takes place, and like half of this book takes place over the course of like a day or two of them just reacting. So very little stuff actually happens, and that's something you're either there for. Now, for me, I read the book and I'm just like, oh, hey, after having been a few years since the last book came out, the new book comes out. I'm like, hey, I get to see what this character is up to. I get to see what that character is up to. I get to see what that character is up to, and it's like reconnecting to old. Because at this point, I'd been reading series for years. A new book was out. I was just happy to see the characters, and I was intrigued by that format of, you know what? If you want to take that time, I'm here for that because that's an interesting way to structure a book. But I recognize it's not necessarily narratively satisfying. As opposed to book 8, which I felt also had issues with moving the story forward, but lacked that same element of it of connecting with characters. Book 8 ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, and there were a lot of things that didn't end up going with that one, and that one I felt was but your patience with the series may vary. A lot of people I know start to patience with it once they get to like maybe book 5-ish. Whereas I'm, it's so funny talking to MJ about the series because we watched the TV show, which I felt was a really interesting take on the series, and I really enjoyed and would have loved to continue from where they left off. Um, but unfortunately, it was canceled after season 3, despite each season being better. But MJ left off halfway through book 5. There was just like one storyline that they just got really bored by, and I kept always having to bite my tongue when talking about the series because I'm like, okay, well, this is going to happen, but I can't talk to you about it because it's from the end of book 5. Oh, this is going to happen, but I can't talk to you about it because it's from the end of book 5. Well, this is going to happen, but I can't talk to you about it because it's at the end of book 5. Not even like something that happens in a different book, but just if they had just made it to the end of that one book, so many plot developments were about to happen. If they could just like make it that little bit next step. So
Yeah, I don't usually have that problem with book series because I now listen to books as audiobooks while I'm doing my day job because I'm lucky enough to have a day job where I can listen to stuff while I'm working most of the time. So like if there's a chapter where just like I'm not super engaged with
yeah,
the story, I will just kind of tune it out and focus on my work until I hear something that perks my interest again. Like I said, I've read all of Stormlight. Stormlight is like 60 hours per book, and there are huge chapters where he's developing this whole other race of creatures that exist on the same world as the humans in that story. And I'm going to be honest, for the first couple books where he's doing that, I just didn't give a shit about any of that stuff. So I didn't really listen to it.
um, but yeah, like Wheel of Time, like they'll introduce like a type of tea, and then it'll be like super important in like 5 books. Which is just kind of great in that way. And then some of the characters they're just fun, and they have these big like action moments that are just really satisfying. Um, it also just hit me in the right spot as I was growing up. So it's hard to say, how as an adult, entering it for the first time might be. But like if you can go through like
Yeah.
big old doorstopper books like Stormlight Archives, then you probably have the patience for something like the Wheel of Time.
Well, like I said, right now I'm working my way through Mistborn and the Belgariad.
Yeah,
I'm kind of going back and forth between those two series, but I'm close enough to the
yeah,
end of both of them, or like where I catch up to Mistborn, that I have started to think about like, okay, what do I want to do next? And I was kind of thinking like, I've avoided them for this long. It should probably either be Wheel of Time or Song of Ice and Fire, and like honestly, Wheel of Time already was the favorite option just because Song of Ice and Fire still ain't finished. So,
yeah. That's the big thing, is that it actually did get finished. It didn't get finished till like 2014. It took 24 years to work through. It took like 24 years to work through the whole thing, or 25 years to work through the whole thing. But it finished, and much like the power reviews, where it took forever, there's something deeply satisfying about making to the end. And a lot of people, I think, would argue that like Memory of Light, the final book, is one of the best books
mm,
because of it being a satisfying culmination. And that's something that is a question when you're working with a series that's that big and that long and that ambitious. Um, is it going to have a satisfying conclusion? I think the general consensus is yes. Um, whether the journey is worth it to get there, that's going to be for you to discover as an individual. I felt like it was, but there were also some points like around book 6 is when I feel like it starts to slow down a little bit. Characters stop all staying in one place and they're like all spreading out all over the place. Um, so, and we get into more of the
mm,
political side of things around that midpoint. And so, if you're not there for the politics and you want the story to have a bit of a stronger pacing, that can be a little bit of a frustration. Um, but if by that point you are invested in the characters and you just want to see their internal struggles as they're moving through these different challenges, then it's not going to be as much of an
now, talking about it this much, I do feel like I would be remiss if I did not ask. Um, did you hear about the incident at Worldcon earlier this year?
I'm not sure. I'm having trouble placing what you're referencing right now.
Okay, so at Worldcom, which is essentially a big fantasy convention, um, Brandon Sanderson and George R. R. Martin were on a panel. It was like a general fantasy authors panel, but it was the first time they were both on a panel together in like 10 years or
Okay.
something like that. Um, and somebody had the balls to go up during the
Oh,
Q&A portion and ask George R. R. Martin, hey, you're getting kind of old. Is Brandon going to finish your books
yeah.
too?
Okay. Okay, that's what you were talking about. Yeah, no, I remember that. Stupid.
Yeah, it's got to be the wildest thing I've heard about happening at a convention in a
Yeah,
while.
yeah. Like I know that people ask silly questions of Power Rangers that have been offensive, and that ranks up there.
Hmm. Oh boy.
There's
I
some
don't
people
even
who
remember
like
what Martin's response was at this point, but I hope it was
yeah.
just like
It's
"fuck you."
oh yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, I think we're now either approaching or just past the 4 hour mark. So let's do like a couple quick, just like rapid fire, general like life things that you only really need to give a sentence to reply to, and then we'll close out. So how
This is
how
gonna
are
have to
you?
be in multiple parts.
Sorry.
Like this podcast will have to be released in multiple parts, like the end of the Wheel of Time.
All right. So what is your favorite episode of Power?
My favorite episode of Power Reviews. I lean heavily towards Trickster Treat, but there's so many that are also really satisfying. Trickster Treat was probably the one. Um, but I'm also just really satisfied with how so much of Year 3 came out. The musical episode, although my voice I feel could have been better. Um, the finale. There were a lot that I felt very proud of, and I do feel very proud of how it concluded. Trickster Treat has been kind of my go-to for a long time, so I may state that one just because of how fun it was.
Okay. What's your favorite color?
My favorite color is orange.
Hmm.
I don't tend to like engage in too many orange things. But I loved Michelangelo. He was my favorite Ninja Turtle growing up, so that kind of solidified orange as my favorite color growing up.
Hell yeah, man. What's your favorite type of vehicle?
Favorite type of vehicle? Um, I really liked my old station wagon. It unfortunately did not survive the conclusion power review. I enjoyed driving minivans. So those are in terms of vehicles that I drive. In terms of other types of vehicles, I think probably the next car that I will purchase whenever I'm ready to do that, I'm going to be aiming for something like an minivan because I think that'd be like specifically I've been looking into that VW the ID Buzz just because it looks like the old VW microbus, and I think that's kind of cool for an electric vehicle, and I want to try it for our next. Yeah, like minivan station wagon kind of guy. I Can you tell I'm a dad?
um, what's the last thing one of your kids did
Um,
that made you laugh?
I'm trying to think about thing specifically today. So I was just I don't know if this was necessarily laughter so much as just a lot of pride. But RJ and I went marching a bit today. With a lot of people out there, and um,
Mhm.
everyone complimented them on their little sign that they made. Because I had my fight fascism sign out that I've shown off in
Oh,
many live streams, and so I put together a little cardboard side for them too, and they got to write what they wanted to write on there. And with the little like backwards end, they wrote "Be nice with friends," and everybody complimented their sign, and it was just so cute. So that was
yeah.
very that was just kind of my proud papa. They just had a great time out at the march. It was the first time ever going out, and it was just a really good
Right
experience
on.
overall. Beyond that, tonight, one thing that I did that managed to get both of them laughing. I was cheerful for them. Was I made a little. I like put my mouth up on top of their heads and made like a sound that kind of raised a little vibration, and they both like giggled so much from that. I'm like, you're my little didgeridoo children when they're like, there was just a little vibration on that.
That's a good one. I might have to try that with my nephew sometime.
Yeah, his little BB was not having a great day. Was feeling a little cranky, but that got them giggling, and they've got a great.
Mhm.
So that was.
If you could go into a hyperbolic time chamber and catch up on any one franchise, what
Oh
would it
my
be?
gosh. A hyperbolic time chamber. Where I could just watch the whole
Mhm.
franchise and get fully caught up on.
Yeah. No consequences for the rest of your life. You basically get to step outside of time and do
I
this.
mean, I feel like I would have to do like it would have to be a Toku franchise where I just because that's you gotta try and make the best use of that time. Um, so it would probably be like Super Sentai Kamen Rider. I don't know
Hmm.
how in which ways I'm limited in this scenario, but just to get caught up on all of that feels like that would be necessary. Although there are plenty of other shows I would like to also check out that just don't feel like as effective a use of a hyperbolic time chamber for media consumption.
Okay. Um, if you could eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
And probably pizza.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Um, if
with
you could
various,
have a
I get choices
ridiculous,
of topping.
yeah, of course. You gotta switch it up. If you could have a ridiculously long podcast length conversation with any person from history, who would it be and why?
Ooh, trying to think if I have to pick anybody from
I mean, anybody who's
yeah,
been
yeah, yeah.
alive on this earth.
Think on that one. Maybe. And you know what? I'm just gonna go for. I've been interested in learning more stuff about Murray Bookchin lately. I don't know that much about him, but I'd be interested in learning more. Might as well learn it from the man himself. So I'm gonna go with that as just a random guess. I'm sure there are other people I could
Fair enough.
absolutely name. But at this point, I've already learned so much about the Power Rangers franchise. I'm not sure if I need another 4 hours spent on it. So we'll toss that in as
Yeah.
just like current interest um, of the current.
Okay. What's Power Rangers episode 278?
278. That's going to be part of Power Rangers in Space. Let me think for a moment. You said 278. That would be okay. So
Yep.
I think that one was 28. So it's in. So this is golden, is it? Trouble now. All right. So 278. So
Sorry.
Power Rangers in Space ends on. So let me just double check in my head there. Yep. Power Rangers in Space ends on 293, so that would be 15 minutes. Episode 28 of Power Rangers in Space. So, all right. So let me think. You know what? I'll work backwards for a moment. I know I've got instruction 1 and 2. That's part. After that, we have Secret City 2-parter, Boston 6 back. And then prior to that, we've got the Secret City 2-parter. We have the Pinky, Be Quiet, Little Guy. So yeah, that would be, I believe, Ranger's Leap of Faith. Yep, and it was one that I covered in Power Reviews. I was double checking in my head to make sure I was correct.
My favorite episode of your favorite season.
Past 1 in the morning, so I wanted to make sure I was accurate. But yeah, Ranger's Leap of Faith.
I love the character stuff for Corona in that one. But Jake, that brings me to my final question. Are you happy?
I'm trying to be. I think that's the best answer I can have on that.
Yeah, and I think that's good enough. As long as you're trying, you'll get there eventually. All right, man. Well, it has been a joy and a pleasure getting to have a prolonged conversation with you once again. I am sorry I kept you up for so long. But hopefully we entertained some people. Hopefully we got some people interested in the Let's Be Superheroes channel, which should be linked below. If anybody's interested, go check it out. It's good content. And I think that's going to do it. So do you want to say any parting words before we close this up?
I suppose I can always say what I could say a number of things here. One of which is from a new. I'll see you in the next adventure. But I'll also add, until next time, farewell, Ranger fan, and let the power.
Excellent. All right, folks. If you want to check out Jake's projects, they are on YouTube under Database Rangers Power Reviews and Let's Be Superheroes. If you want to check out anything I do on the internet, you can find them via my link tree, which is in the video description. And if you want to support this podcast, hey, give us a like, comment down below with something that might have perked your interest from this interview. Hit the subscribe button, enable notifications. Hype if you're on mobile. I don't know if that's a thing Boingo's ever said during the outro to one of these, but there it is. Thank you for listening to this. I'm sorry it was such a stripped down episode, but hopefully it was still really entertaining and interesting. I found it to be at the very least. And hey, we'll see you next week for hopefully the full cast together to do our spooky October Analytical Fanboys on Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. But until then, have a good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever, whenever you are, and just take care.